this working board / finance committee meeting to order at 7:12 p.m. Apologies for our little bit of lateness there. Because we have both a working board meeting and finance meeting tonight together, we're going to do the business of the finance committee first and then move into the discussion item for working board, and I'll pass the mallet over to Tracy at that point. So we'll start with the first agenda item for the meeting, which is the minutes. I move that the Board of Education, whoops. Oh, I'm sorry, I read the wrong thing. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes of the December 8th, 2015? Are you gonna, we're not gonna roll call now. Okay, so we should do that now before I call the minutes. Okay. Sorry, we'll do a roll call. Here.
Ms. Chow. Mr. Rindis.
Here.
Ms. Garrison.
Here.
Here.
We added you.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, so now we know everybody's in attendance. Now I'll come to, do we have a motion to approve the minutes of the December 8th, 2015 Board of Finance Committee meeting?
I so move.
Second.
Second. Are there any corrections or addition to the minutes as they've been provided to us in the packet? Anyone? Oh, okay. Then the Board Finance Committee recommends that the minutes of the December 8, 2015 Board Finance Committee meeting be approved as presented.
Ms. Chow.
Yes?
Mr. Rindis.
Yes.
Ms. Garrison.
Yes.
Okay. We're going to move to 4 action items, all related to capital projects, and then after that, our discussion items. So the first action item for us is the asbestos bid, so I'll pass it to you, Mary,
Sure.
to discuss.
Thank you, Candace. We are bringing to the Board Finance Committee the lowest bid recommendation for asbestos work in several of our school buildings, as you can see in the memo. This is a contractor, Holian, who has done work here in the district before and who our consultant, our environmental consultant, is very familiar with. We do have Art Kent, the district asbestos manager, and our environmental consultant, Greg Jones from True North, with us today. We are recommending the bid for this work with the alternates, and it is within our estimate.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and, as soon as I get my sheet back. I think I have to, it's not on there? Okay. So we need a motion to, we'll first ask the motion and if we have any questions. Do we have a motion to accept the asbestos bid as presented?
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
So now let's open up if there are any questions about the asbestos bid or
I just had
presentation.
one question. I don't know who to direct it to, but I noticed in the letter from True North Consultants that we make sure that we try to get bids from minority and women-owned businesses.
Yes.
And that's, I take it, our standard practice.
Yes.
Yes.
And was the winning bidder by any chance a women-owned or a minority-owned business?
I don't believe so. Let me have our consultant join us at the table. No, they're not. They're not a minority business.
So do we typically, unless there's a reason not to, just generally go for the lowest bid if they're found qualified?
Yes, we have to by law approve the lowest bid from a responsible bidder. So they have to be bidding on the work that we're asking them to do, and they have to be qualified to do that work within the bid spec guidelines. And this company is the lowest bid that we're bringing for recommendation.
So if a woman-owned or a minority-owned business, if they were in there in the mix, but they weren't the lowest, we couldn't hire them even if that was our priority.
Unless we had a reason to disregard the lowest bid. If we found the lowest bidder to be non-responsive,
Yes.
if they were bidding on work that wasn't up to our specs, or different work, or incomplete work, or if we had a bad experience on record with a contractor, we would not recommend them. But the threshold is pretty high to not recommend a low bidder.
Okay, thanks.
Are there other questions from the table?
I
Omar?
think we should add something that just says, where it says next step, stakeholder engagement, something that talks about either PTA or just make sure that we're covering all our bases. Because it looks like we're engaging the principals and the administration, but are we engaging the schools to make sure that they're well aware, that their PTAs are aware, and parents are aware, and everyone knows? Because I
Excellent.
think you hear asbestos and people think bad
Not good thing.
things. Yes.
It's okay.
There is a notice sent out to the school staff and to the parents in the school that we are doing this.
There's a legal requirement that we post a notice when we are going to be doing asbestos work, and that's posted on the doorway of the buildings. But we could certainly add the PTA to give them a heads up that this work is planned. I am really thrilled with the bids coming in line with our estimate. I'm thrilled that we're recommending the alternates to do additional classrooms in some of our schools here, so this is really good news.
So then I think we should tell a good news story then, because if I walk
Yes.
to a door and I see asbestos cleaning, it doesn't sound good. That's all I'm
Well,
saying.
and
So-
we would do that ahead of
Yes.
posting the notice, of course, yes. We will work with our principals to get that message
In the
out.
spirit of what you're saying, to be able to have principals be able to communicate to their community members what's going on, along with the compliance letters and everything else that we have to do is what we'll do.
And by the way, just so the public is aware and the board is aware, we do not have any staff or students in the building while this sort of work is going on. That's why we do the brunt of it over the summer. We did a small scope over the winter break when no one was in the buildings. But we will certainly pass that message along.
Okay, so if there are any other questions, we'll go ahead and take the vote for this.
Ms. Chow,
Yes.
Mr. Rickes,
Yes.
Ms. Garrison.
Yes.
So moved. So the next is a somewhat related item, which is
Yes.
the floor tile replacement.
Yes, we have, again, the low bid that we're bringing forward from Libertyville Tile. They happen to be the only bidder, but they have done extensive work in the district. We're very familiar with their work. They're familiar with our buildings. And obviously, when we remove tile, that either the tile or the glue it would be containing asbestos materials, we need to replace the tile. So this bid is replacing the tile, and it is a different vendor who does the abatement, and this vendor would be replacing the floor tile. So it's the low bid, again, that we're recommending for approval.
Got questions about this, and they're both projects, we neglected to say, for the summer. 16. If we don't have any questions about the tile, then I'll frame this in a motion. I move that the administration, well, the Board of Education award the base bid and the alternate bids to Libertyville Tile for the flooring replacement project in the contract amount of $158,908.
We're sending this on to the full board, is what we're doing, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Did I say, I'm sorry, the Finance Committee.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Second?
Yes. Take a second. that one.
Ms. Chow,
Yes.
Mr. Rickes.
Yes.
Ms. Garrison.
Yes.
So we will bring those forward to the board for action at the February 22nd meeting. The next agenda item is the bond, the Lincoln Stormwater Retention bid.
Right.
Item.
We have, again, the low bid that we're bringing forward for recommendation from a company known as Team Real, R-E-I-L. This is a vendor who both our architect and civil engineer who are present with us this evening are very familiar with, and it's the low bid within our cost estimates for the filling in the retention pond area at Lincoln School. And this work would begin as weather permits in March, so that we can have it done by June, and then we're going to let the sod sit unaltered until September.
Okay, I'm going to make the motion for this, and then maybe we'll have questions at that point. And I apologize for kind of fuddling through this. We don't have the motions written out, so. So, move that the Finance Committee forward the base bid and alternate bids for the Lincoln Storm Water Retention Project to be awarded to Team Real on the contract amount of $573,328. We have a second? Thank you.
We want to discuss before we vote.
Yeah.
Oh, sure,
before you
yeah. So, are there questions or any additional context you wanted to provide?
Nope, happy to take
Okay.
questions.
So let's go to questions. Aye.
This is Tom Richlick, the civil engineer with
Hi, Don.
Gewalt, who's worked on this project for a while. This is the second bid.
Yes. It's good to see you all again.
Thanks.
I'll be happy to answer questions unless you'd like me to walk through anything specific.
I think we're pretty familiar with the project this point.
Okay.
We'll go to questions. Meg?
So I just have a question. Is there going to be fencing around the sod? How is the sod going to be protected?
Yes, one of the alternates for the project included a fence replacement and upgrade of the fence that exists around the west side to continue around the east side. It would be open. I don't believe there's gating, but there is a perimeter fence that's open more south towards the school.
What Ms. Cooley is asking is, while the sod is in place and before it's being walked on,
Yes.
will the construction fencing remain up?
Yes, we were proposing a construction fence, and my intent to this, my vision of it, is to have a construction fence in similar fashion to what you'd see closer towards the city with visual screening, so kind of keep curious eyes, right?
Yes.
Well, it'll make that much more of a cool surprise when we unwrap the present at the end of the, ready to go.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other question?
What's the Alt A3? What is that?
Great question.
Well, that's the deduct. Do you want to discuss the slightly different,
It's
less
such a large
expensive
variance.
cost
Someone
method?
deducted 200,000, someone
Yep.
deducted 14,000.
Okay, so alternate A3 was the deduct to use the alternate detention system. So we developed the plans with two systems in mind, with the whole intent of forcing the two vendors. One is the storm trap, the big box detention system, and the contact, which is sort of that tunnels of fun pipe network. Okay, both of them don't normally compete, and this provided an opportunity for those two vendors to compete through the 14 contractors that are 14 plan holders, but there was probably about 10 that submitted prices for it. All the different contractors also had a different way of going about their own work. That's means and methods, that's their purview. And in the case of Team Real, who had the largest deduct, they're very familiar with the pipe network construction. They have lighter equipment, so this is a familiar operation. They're understanding their efficiencies. The flip side of that, Berger Excavating had the lowest deduct. They're much more familiar with the construction of the storm trap. They have access to the cranes to set that stuff in place, the larger equipment. And one of the limitations to the pipe network is once it's constructed, you don't want to drive on it with any heavy machinery. It's designed to go under field, under parking lots, et cetera. It's probably a long answer, but Berger wanted to do the storm trap, was more familiar with it, so their deduct was less.
And so to summarize what he just said, the alternate 3 is a deduct for for what most contractors had as a less expensive option. There were two different options for addressing this drainage issue. This recommending the alternate is for the low bid, a less expensive option. And that's the tunnel of fun option,
Yep.
if I'm correct, Tom.
I'm sure Contact would like me to use a more precision engineering sounding name,
Tunnel of
but
Fun.
everybody kind of gets it.
Mary? Oh, sorry. Claudia, I was looking at her.
Okay. It's fascinating to have watched this start at a certain point as far as the total cost, and then go up, and then go up again, and all of a sudden it seems to have plummeted back down to almost, I think, where we were when we started in terms of looking at this. And I know, is it because the scope of work changed, or is it because we were right in our timing and was such that we got lots of bids in, and it was very competitive because we timed the request for the bids correctly?
All of that, actually. If you recall, when we spoke about, at the time when we rejected the last set of bids, we were seeking opportunities for an optimal bidding timing, for the time for everybody to solicit their numbers. and for an optimal construction period. The bidding time, you come back from the Christmas break and everybody's hungry, wants to get their next job. So January is a great time to open new projects, have them on the street, they want to go to work then. Second, if we can complete a job before Memorial Day, or the majority of a job before Memorial Day, most of the construction in the Chicagoland area for education, parks, et cetera, happens between Memorial and Labor Day. So if we can have a job that is outside of that parameter, we have more opportunity for competition driving down price. So.
Well, thank you for getting so many bids.
I just have a question about the paragraph that talks about, I read in here, now I'm not spotting it. I just want to make sure that the 733 is, the 573 is all-inclusive.
It is all-inclusive
There
for
are
the
no
bid.
other fees. Are there project management fees or anything else that are not covered?
Well, professional fees are not in that bid. So we have professional fees we have paid to both the civil engineer and the architect. We have Carl Getz from Archon. We have a small amount of outstanding fees for each of them, but we're still all within the cost estimates.
And so what is that small amount?
$84,000.
No, that was already
No, that's
paid.
what's already spent.
I believe it's 25,000 outstanding between the two.
Okay.
So
And do
then-
we expect that to stay at that level?
Yes.
Is there any variable or risk that would drive those up that we?
Acts
I think
of God. Yes, unanticipated events, we find something unexpected, but the hole has already been excavated.
Right.
So we're
And
not
I don't know if we
digging the
can,
hole. Right.
if we update this even, or I'm not sure how to handle it, but I just want to make sure that everyone who's been following this knows, there's actually 25 grand more that we're going to be spending on this than what's
So then
reflected in the memo.
the anticipated total cost would come in somewhere, if it's 573 plus 83, it's 325, that's 650, right? Plus 20, that's 625, that's 675. So somewhere under 700. It would be good just to have that, what we expect that total cost to be relative to the 733.
Right,
So
'cause-
it sounds like we will be under the 733 by maybe 30,000.
It does. However, the one other thing I forgot to mention is we may have permit fees that we need to pay to the city of Evanston, as we have on various projects. So that's, and then some watering fees for the sod once it's been in place. So that was what the balance was allocated for.
So that's why you left it at 733 and didn't
Yes.
take it down
Yes.
by the amount of the bid? Okay.
And I'm just curious, permit and watering fees, do we have an idea how much?
Watering fees, I would say, could be around 8,000 because we had that on a similar project. Permit fees, Tom, do you have any idea? City of
Community by
Evanston.
community is different. Unfortunately, I'm not super familiar with how Evanston is going to view
Tens of thousands, single-digit thousands?
All right.
I don't know. I mean,
comparable municipalities are not that high. They're a couple thousand, not in the
500.
not in a five-figure number.
Maybe that's another 10 to 15 total.
The MWRD waives their fee structure, but the local municipality can assess, right?
okay.
If
So
I
we're
can
talking
just,
about another like 35 grand that's
Right, yeah.
not reflected here.
Yeah.
Okay.
just to underscore Richard's question, and back at you, Tom, the 573,000 is a solid figure. We don't expect it to have surprise figures that will far exceed that.
No, that's the contract, that's the team reel's cost to do the job.
Right.
So as Mary outlined, the other fees are the professional fees, but yes, that is it's a reasonable number. I've talked to the Cedarlands, who are the owners at Team Reel, and they're comfortable with the figure, they're comfortable with the project, comfortable with the schedule. So,
And I
Let's
just
make
have-
him,
oh,
I'm done.
were you finished?
I just
Sorry.
have one last question, because this is gonna start in March. Is there a plan for where the students are gonna be playing between now and the end of the year?
Be March in the end, when the work starts.
Because the field now will no longer be available.
that's a good question.
Don, do you,
We are looking at a pre-construction meeting, I think, around the end of February, that the staff and the principal will be involved in. So we'll be discussing, where that area is, how that, that it will have all the, people involved in that discussion.
I thought they couldn't play on that. That's why we're filling it in.
No,
'cause
they
couldn't
can't play on
it
it during the
They don't
winter
play, that's
when
your
it's
question.
icy.
when it's icy.
When it's icy,
Then I thought it turned muddy.
it does get very muddy. So the sod will hold up better. It could still certainly turn muddy with sod, but it was the hazard with the steep slope of it, especially in the winter.
So it sounds like, I'm going to try to repeat that, Don, just so others, so when is that meeting occurring?
I think we're talking about kind of scheduling that around the end
Yeah,
of.
the last week of February, first week of March.
Okay.
The contract start date is March 14th, so we'd want to have a meeting a week or two before, once the board is officially awarded, so they're engaged to get the WRD, the city, and the staff all understanding the schedule, where, when the displacement will begin, what the fencing will look like, what the sequence of construction is, so.
And we'll include our transportation, make sure it's.
And we can work with Ms. Cooney
Yeah.
even ahead of time and with faculty members to be able to start to think about how we live through this while we improve the landscaping.
And I would say the comment that Ms. Omar had said relative to the previous is the same thing in terms of engaging the parent community as well. I mean, a lot of folks have been tracking this, but, it's here now. What's the impact going to be near term on families? And great.
I guess my final question is do we want to leave that number at 733 when we know it's not going to be that?
Well,
We aren't sure.
we aren't sure, but we have already.
But isn't that true of every other single project that we have, is that there are always things that we're not sure of, there's professional fees that we're not sure of, but this is something that 733 was based on a bid.
No, it was based on bids with estimated fees, professional fees, watering fees, and permit fees. It was all added into that number, and we are spot on with that
You just
estimate.
want to clarify what happens if we don't spend it?
Right, please.
Oh, it would fall back to the cash balance in the bond, in the capital fund, so.
And that money was allocated from last year, so we're not voting on that 733.
Correct.
At this time. That was from the previous year's bond. So the 733 we already have in the cash.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to
Correct.
know
Yes.
what would happen if we didn't.
We're-
Yes.
It's like we approve, more than we think we might need in this instance, just to make sure we have enough to
Right,
cover it. and
yes.
They don't have to come back and ask us for 10 grand more because
Right.
we, underestimated.
So we'll revert back.
It reverts back to the cash balance in that
Cash
fund.
balance.
Yep.
I guess I wanted the recognition for the fact that we got a bid that was a lot lower than we thought it would be.
This is falling right in line with the estimates. By the time we have, we're not sure about the permit fees, but with all the estimates that we anticipated, it's falling right in line, and we're very pleased.
But we rejected something that was.
Oh,
a
it was
rate of
much higher,
800,000.
much
Yeah.
higher, yes.
Right. It's still reasonable to have a contingency. Regardless of all the best preparations, it's always good to have a contingency. And if we're talking about 30 grand, that's only 5%.
Yeah. So before we go to vote, because I didn't ask for any folks in the audience who might want to comment on this topic as we go forward, especially with the discussion items, we'll take comments before the discussion, but I neglected to say so. Is there anybody here tonight that wants to speak to the water retention project? No? Okay, I just want to make sure I acknowledged we did. All right, so if there aren't any other questions, then I think we can go to the vote, since we already put the motion forward.
Ms. Chow?
Yes.
Mr. Rickus?
I'm so happy to finally be able to say yes.
Can I
Yes.
vote too?
Just to
You get to vote when it,
You can all vote to say
sign
yes
off here
once
for a
again.
long time.
Wonderful. Thank you all for your sage advice and us, denying the last bid so that we could get to this point.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
that.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Carl. Appreciate it, Don.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Yay. Okay. So next, we're moving to the discussion of the overall bond sale for 2016 and the recommended bond expenditures, including technology. Before we go to discussion, I'm sure there will be discussion on this. Thank you all. I'll go ahead and make the motion. Do we have a motion to approve the 2016 bond sale and recommended bond expenditures, including technology?
approve sending it to the board, right? Correct. I just think we have to say that, because that's what we're doing.
Yeah, sorry, I was just reading what it said, you're right. Approve moving it forward to the board.
Okay, I so move.
Second.
Second, okay, So now we'll open to discussion, and Mary, if you could start with an overview of what we have at hand.
Sure. On the bond sale side, we have an estimate from Spear Financial. They are our bond financial advisors, that we have an estimated $6 million available in our debt service. What we're recommending here in total expenditures would be a bond sale of $3.7 million, using $500,000 cash on hand from the last bond sale toward the balance of the expenditures. If this is moved to the board and the board approves it on February 22nd, just want to review the timeline briefly. The bonds will then go out for sale, and in March, what the board will be approving is the accepting of the final bond sale. So that's kind of the process for that bond sale. And we can do that under the resolution that the board approved in November of 2014. As far as the expenditures go, this list does look different from what you saw in October. We have added some expenditures, and I'm going to kind of review what those were and why they're included on this list. Package, page 20, I believe. Technology expenses, we reduced the software and related cost line. It used to include staff cost of $50,000, so that line used to be $450,000. We reduced it to $400,000. $50,000 of that staff cost has been added into the operating budget for next year. And then we have $400,000 for potential new leases / purchases. Stacy Beardsley has been working very closely on what that might look like. And so that is a figure familiar to what we've seen in the past, but we're not quite sure if it would be a lease or a purchase. So the technology expenses are closer to $1.9 million. On the capital project list, we added $20,000 to our plumbing requirement estimate. The city is requiring that we do plumbing work in our buildings, replacing adding some RPZ backflow preventer valves to some plumbing, and we also have some plumbing replacement planned in the annex ceiling at Dawes School. So that number was increased by $20,000, just as an updated estimate. We also had some sump pumps fail at Willard School in the last couple of weeks. That was an emergency item. That the cost to replace those is $40,000 that has been added to this plumbing line. Those parts have been ordered. We have a temporary fix in place over there, and we will get those installed as soon as those pumps are available. We also added $20,000 to mechanical work at Willard School. That is a new line item, and what that is, it's replacing a part to the boiler at Willard. The boiler is working fine, but the part that helps disperse the heat is in need of replacement, and that estimate is $20,000. So that's, again, an emergency expenditure that was added since the board has seen this list previously. New items on here include the JEH security of $25,000. It would bring this building up to district standards for other buildings where we have children in the building. We have hundreds of students that come here for programs from birth through age 5. And I'm not going to get into details as to what this includes, but it is providing very similar security outside of putting cameras in classrooms where we have deck teachers. That we will not do, but it improves the security here to bring it on par with other buildings in the district. And that's a $25,000 cost. Also, new to this list is a $15,000 cost to create a registration space here at the JEH building. We do our registration centrally, which does provide efficiency, so we don't have registration staff in all of the buildings. It's done centrally, and those requirements and processes have been standardized, which is very good. But where parents register now is out at the front reception desk. The acoustics in our lobby out here are not good for listening and hearing. And also, there's no privacy out there. When families come to register, they're sharing details about their living arrangements. Could be a distressed family. It could be a homeless family living in a shelter for various reasons, and they may also be discussing income levels or need, or the needs, special needs of their children. And right now, we have no private space with which parents can do that. So this $15,000 cost estimate would create a standalone office area on the south end of the reception desk where the registrar could go with families to register families in a private room. There would be visibility, so security would be maintained as far as seeing, the front door and who's coming and going from the Family Center and the Head Start Child Care Wing. So that estimate is $15,000, and that is on the list to provide the security and privacy that we feel is due to our families and students as they're here to register. The final, well, actually, that's not the final. The next new item on the list is $35,000 for a Rhodes locker room conversion, creating a space at Rhodes for the middle school students to change into and out of their physical development clothes has been an ongoing concern. I have heard reports of staff members of opposite genders who have either walked in or nearly walked in on students in various stages of undress, quite by mistake, because they didn't see the sign on the door or whatever covering was on the classroom window. So we just got this cost estimate very recently, which would convert the long, skinny space just east of the auditorium, which is currently used for office space. And the renovation would involve moving the wall so the space would be evenly divided. It would include heating and air ventilation to the area, electrical to the area, and then installing lockers for the children, small size lockers for the kids to use as they're changing to and from their gym clothes. So, and there's also an allotment in there to renovate other space where we would have to move the office space too. So we know we'd be touching another area in the building to recreate that office space as in a shared space. So that estimate is on here mainly because we just got cost estimates from a provider, and it looked like a very low-cost solution to a problem that is affecting the children's well-being. It's affecting the parents. I've spoken to numerous parents very concerned and upset about the current situation over there without a private space. Children are changing clothes in classrooms, basically, and despite the signage and the privacy we've tried to create, it is just not a foolproof system. And this is much less expensive than the building addition, which we have seen previously as proposed by TMP. They had a phenomenal design. When we have funding to do, library renovation, secure entrance, we could build a separate locker room addition, but that's down the road with substantially higher cost. So we are recommending moving forward with this small scope of work at this time. And finally, the other add on this list is a miscellaneous work line of $100,000. We are aware that with our debt service being very tight, we have delayed replacing parts, mechanical, plumbing, electrical, and heating, and we felt it would be wise to have $100,000 extra on hand to be used only for emergency situations. We would be communicating that to Dr. Gorin and the board. It would include things like if we had the sump pump disaster at Willard, we would have $40,000 we could get access to immediately without needing to wait for the next board meeting for approval. So there would be a notification process. It would certainly only be used for emergency situations, but because we've delayed so many projects, we are recommending that we have $100,000. Hopefully we won't need it, and it can just remain on hand. But we felt that would be prudent to have, considering how tight funding is and the projects that have been delayed. And so that reviews kind of the changes to this list. So the grand total of projects is $4.2 million. We do have $500,000 on hand from the last bond sale that has been unallocated. So this would require a bond sale in the approximate amount of $3.7 million.
And what would that leave us in terms of the balance on the debt service extension?
Sure, that would leave us an estimated $2.3 million. And with each calendar year, we gain another estimated $2.5 million of principal that we can use for debt service projects. So January 2017, we would have the 2.3 plus 2.5, we would have 4.8 million a year from now.
And we've been basically operating to make sure that we had over $4 million to use on a yearly basis.
Okay. So there is some other material in this packet around referenda. I'd like to hold that part of the discussion till we get to the projections, because I think it kind of dovetails well with that. So if we could focus, the questions right now specifically on the capital project. Is there anyone who would like to speak to this agenda item before we start our discussion?
Does that include me?
Sure, why not?
I don't know, do I wait or do I go now?
You can go now.
Oh, okay. So I'm Paula Zielinski, and I'm head of the Teachers Union. I had a question, I actually have some questions and comments about the Rhodes lockers. I guess the first one is, you know, this has been explored twice before, is my understanding, and it was always that the secure entrances needed to be addressed first. So I think we're just wondering what about this has changed?
Can I respond? Sure. Oh, the secure entrances are certainly still a priority of the board and the administration, and they are on our summary project list. We have lower cost options to build second vestibules at schools, and we have a more complete option that TMP brought to us, which includes more building renovation and a more practical secure entrance that we would like to see if funding should open up in the future. I believe the secure entrance, the low-cost option, is somewhere between $70,000 and $80,000 to build a second vestibule, and we feel this is a much lower-cost item that is also of priority as far as our students and parents go, and we are recommending this with the idea that secure entrances are still a priority, and I would like to see us being able to fund the more practical building renovation model, so where we could get more than just a double vestibule at our remaining buildings.
Okay, so, but nothing about the situation's changed, there's not.
We have had
Nothing's
instances where staff have inadvertently walked in on students.
Yeah, no, I heard that.
But it's a cost factor that I mean, it's about $80,000 to do that renovation, if not more. And then there are other places in the district, which is where we want to have the lion's share of that resource available so that we can do that writ large.
Okay. Second thing would be, you know, DEC has had concerns since we learned about this, when people were going in to measure. There still has been, just so you know, little or no communication to the teachers, especially those who might be affected. It's not just office areas, is my understanding. Some of them use it as teaching space. Can you share more on what's the plan for them?
I can tell you it's been communicated to me that the area there is used for office space, and we do have an allocation in this estimate to create flexible space in other parts of the building. So shared offices. I am not aware of any class that goes on
So
in
like
this
just
space.
band orchestra, that's where my understanding is they do their ensemble work. That's where they do their lessons that they have one-on-one with kids. It's also, I guess, they don't have a conference room there, am I correct? At Rhodes? So sometimes they use that, part of that space for IEP meetings, things like that. You know, the PE teachers and the teachers certainly want to see the current, want to see locker rooms at Rhodes. But just to add on that, you know, the arts teachers also, you know, I'm getting a lot of concern about they already don't have space. They're already sharing space with gen ed teachers. They're in the auditorium. You know, I haven't actually heard, you know, what's the plan for not just the offices, but for the teaching space that some of them use it as. The conference area, there's a book room in there. I mean, it's just that the teachers haven't heard what the plan is.
And we need to develop it more clearly. Do you know, actually, when that space was a computer lab?
Yeah.
Where were all the classes taught that you're suggesting are being taught now?
And it was a computer lab.
Because that's what, when I landed, that's what that space was, and then it was redone.
I don't know.
Yeah, so I think we
No
should,
idea.
it's a good way
all
to
of our
explore.
schools are growing, and so office spaces are now becoming classrooms
Right,
and,
right.
and things like that, so. I mean, we've probably added special ed teachers, things like that, so.
How many rooms are we losing in terms of this communal space?
I'm sorry, in, the-
If we're moving the offices over into another area, how much overall space that's being used either for offices or shared teaching space are we losing?
my understanding is we would be combining like shared office space, so there are two parts of that room now. The PTA uses the smaller part, and then the other part is, from what we understand, used as office space. And we would be creating a shared space in the administrative area, so we have no plans to touch a classroom space.
I just mean okay, so what's been converted into the locker rooms is how many, is it 2 areas?
It's 2 areas. There's a smaller area where I understand it was created for the PTA to have space. That's on the south end. The larger space is on the north end of that divided area. And my understanding is it's used for office space.
So we'd be using both those spaces.
But dividing them equally, so we'd have equal sizes, so we'd have to move a wall. It's a,
Do you know roughly the square footage at all? Or-
I don't. Don, do you recall?
I don't know exactly how, but it was, I think it's 2 offices that does share the one
North
side
end.
that Dr. Brown had said, and then the other spaces, PTA and storage. And we would walk with, once again, the principal and the staff to get them involved, if this renovation takes place.
It does seem, though, that we should know exactly how the space at present is being used, because if it is being used for, smaller music classes or, I don't know, whatever it's being used for, and not just offices. I think we should know that before we go ahead and just like willy-nilly
It was
change
explained to me that band and orchestra had been provided in the staff lounge, but we can certainly get an update from the principal on if exactly how that office space is being used.
Mary, can you say what you just said again? Band and orchestra what?
Well, my understanding was it was being offered in the staff lounge at various times of the day. That's my understanding. That may not be, it may have
It just
changed.
sounds-
So, that happens lots of places. So if I can just put, I think your point, Claudia, is a great one, is if we could take to the side the ability to understand exactly what the current use is for the space, the full scope of the current use, and then how we would fulfill those needs if the space were to be renovated or changed going forward as a next step.
And I would add on, because I think that's really important. I guess I'm uncomfortable with this, not only because of what has been discussed, but also just wondering what had this move up the list. And I think that kind of gets to Paula's question, not just within Bessie Roads, but looking at all of our potential investments. So I think the first question is what you've posed, but even if that were answered, I think, and it were answered adequately, and we felt like it was not going to displace anything of significance, I would still wonder, how this fits in the context of all the other projects that we have considered.
Well, Mary, how would you articulate for us what the criteria is that we are using, the objective criteria to determine? Because we certainly, I think we've all used criteria as we've gone through this, but it would be good to really be explicit
Sure.
about that.
We did create a rubric for decision-making for capital projects, and it was building condition or item condition is one consideration. What is the immediate danger or threat to building occupants, which could be roofing, masonry, heating, electrical, plumbing, etc. A second area to consider is safety and security, and privacy would fall in here. What are the concerns, dangers, or threats to building occupants? It could be fire system-related equipment, telephone, security, doors, locks, hardware, etc. Environmental concerns, immediate or potential threat or danger to building occupants would include things like air quality, lead, and asbestos abatement. Legal requirements, life safety, fire prevention, what are state and local requirements, such as the plumbing replacements, fire alarm codes, panels, life safety inspection reports or items. And finally, the cost to repair or replace items and building integrity. So what do we think we could afford to do that would take an item off of the list based on condition and funding availability?
Sorry, I was still trying to write down. Yes, Meg?
How many buildings do not have secure entrances? I don't have the.
5. There's
the
5.
list.
5. It's the 2 magnet schools, King Arts and Rhodes. It's Orrington, Washington, and Lincolnwood.
So, and it's true that these couple projects,
And JH.
No, JEH does have a locked door
Does. They have
that
a
now
locked door.
goes to the stairway, so that area has been locked, and the doors to the, where the programs are locked, but our front door
The front door is not.
is not locked.
And so that sort of was my second part of the question. So you felt that we needed to do more to JH before doing a secure entrance on one of the 5 that didn't have anything on it?
In my opinion, our doors in our school buildings are secure. They are locked. They all have cameras linked to the main office and other areas of visibility. We do not have that here.
Okay.
I don't want to get into a lot of more detail, but we are not up to par here with what we have at our other schools where we have students, and we have hundreds of children coming and going from this building daily.
And the other buildings have 100. I mean, yes, I hear you on that, but yeah.
I think the point is, and it's a good distinction to ask, the standard that we already have in place for all of our school buildings in terms of not just the locking doors, but the cameras and such, and for students coming and going, is not the same standard that's being held here. We are below that standard currently.
Thank you.
And aren't all the doors that lead to the programs and the children and the staff, those are both locked? So it's really just the lobby we're talking about.
That's correct.
Then that gives you, if you're in the lobby, do you have access then to unlock the doors?
Well,
to the
and we're
other
not talking
doors?
about locking doors here. I mean, it's very hard to have this discussion without getting into specifics. It's not just about doors.
But the doors are locked. I mean, we have the new locking door that is new as of maybe a year ago, and that's out in the lobby that would head out, it locks off the stairs and the elevator. The doors to the program area are locked, and they've been locked for a while. What we don't have here are cameras to provide visibility of common space and entrances. We have absolutely no monitoring of those at this point.
If we did have cameras, though, who would be watching those cameras?
We have access in certain places, and
But we
we
don't, I
would,
mean, we aren't staffed that way here, are we?
not today, we're not. But we do have access from various places.
And there's recording devices on those cameras as well. It's a good question. I mean, it's a good question on how we would, I mean, do we want to have somebody who's watching all the time? In the ideal
Well,
world,
I'm
yes.
thinking-
And we'd also want to document if, God forbid, something happened, we'd want to document that as well.
Yeah, that is important. I think the other thing, though, is that in the buildings that have the cameras on the outside, so you can see who's trying to get in the first place, that's the office staff can, if the doorbell rings, they can look up and see who's out there. That's kind of one of the reasons why we have those
Right.
outside cameras. And here, where would we put it?
We do have a front desk person here. I mean,
Yeah, it's a pretty big space. I don't know, high ceiling.
yeah, it's not exactly the same, but
It
there.
isn't the same.
So getting back to kind of the discussion of the criteria, could I move us back to that? So what Mary just laid out was a number of reasons for something to make it on this list in a very resource-constrained environment, right? We know we have resource scarcity. Does that seem like a fair representation for the Finance Committee, the board members here, of what we should be using as criteria, number one? And then secondly, if that is fair criteria, do we think these projects fit in that criteria? I think that is the second question.
As I was listening to the criteria, I was trying to think through for some of the projects that I have questions about, what might have raised them to the highest level using that criteria, and I wasn't clear about a couple, so I'll just ask about those. So for Bessie Rhodes, which factors drove that to the top of the list?
That was under the area of safety, security, and privacy of students.
So, I mean, it's really the privacy component there, right? Because they're safe and secure in the building already, but it's
They are, although
more the privacy.
we've had children in various stages of undress who have been walked in upon by members of the opposite gender, quite by mistake. We've had parents and students very concerned and upset about those situations. And it's the only school where we house middle school students that does not have a separate locker room for children to change in.
It makes me uncomfortable, as I distinctly remember the parents coming and begging for us to approve this, and then we were saying, no, we can't do that because we have this whole plan where we're going to make a secure entrance and we're going to do all these other things, and it'll be much more cost-effective if we do this locker room thing in in conjunction with those things. And now I feel like we're saying, no, that was just that doesn't apply anymore.
Prior to very recently, I didn't have a low-cost estimate to put a locker room at Rhodes. Short of the building addition that TMP did recommend and brought forward, I think, to this board a year or so ago, year and a half ago, they had an estimate to build a locker room addition off, which would be very nice, off to the south end of the building, right next to where the gym is. And it would be less expensive to do that sort of construction. At the same time, we could do a secure entrance and, make a practical main office. That main office is very tiny over there. And we could also enlarge the library and put that where the room is opposite the auditorium and do some abatement. So there was, if we're doing construction, it certainly would be more cost-effective if we did a larger scope of construction at one point. This is a small renovation.
Which sounds like it.
Did you say that you could put an addition onto the gym?
I believe where TMP had anticipated putting a locker room addition was on the south end of the gym.
And what's the cost of that?
It was part of a whole plan it was $2+ million. I don't recall, I don't have the number at the moment. TMP brought their plans to the board finance committee, I want to say in August or September of 2014. Yeah.
It was significant.
It was. We would certainly need a funding source for it, but it was a very practical design and layout, and that would provide a much larger locker room space right next to the gym. That area that we're talking about renovating into a locker room was thought to be used for an enlarged library, which could be expanded off to the east with beautiful windows facing that grassy area. The secure entrance, double vestibule would be created on the north side of the building where the entrance is now, and the main office would be into where the library is now, which is why the library would need to move in that option. So it's a much more practical but much more costly design. So this is much more cost effective to provide privacy for the boys and girls to have for locker room use.
And I think we still have the question that Candace put on the table just about making sure that we're not displacing other use for the space. The other question, going back to yours about the criteria, is just the JEH spaces or the projects. So the registration space, I may be very overly simplistic as I think about this. Do we have to actually have a construction project to get the level of privacy that we need? Can we not do something, or have a cubicle out there that is simply building cubicle walls as opposed to a permanent sort of structure?
And we thought about doing a cubicle in that space. We don't know if the sound would it be conducive for conversation? Would the cubicle walls provide enough masking of the sound problems we have with the tall ceiling? So, and secondly, would it provide enough privacy where conversations could be had and heard there but not outside of the cubicle walls? And finally, the visibility of a cubicle was a little bit of a concern. We didn't want the registrar behind cubicle walls not being able to see the doors to the Children and Family Center and also to the front entrance.
They're in a separate office, aren't they going to be?
That's what I was.
The office design has windows on all sides, yeah, so the visibility would be maintained.
I think you can get cubes
Transparent
with
cubes.
transparent walls. Yeah, I mean,
We can spec that out. I mean, it's, you go into banks and you can see some of those types of environments. We can spec that out.
because again, it seems like privacy was the issue that elevated that, and I just feel like there might be a less expensive option that might still address, most of the privacy issue.
I presume that you thought about using, we have lots of conference rooms already in this building. I mean, if you go straight up the stairs, there's one at the top, there's one down in the, there are a number of spaces that are set up for conferences, and they are private, and people couldn't overhear conversations, and we considered using those. And I was just
Well-
wondering why we can't use those.
We have one staff member who mans the reception desk and handles the registrations, and if she's with the family away from the central desk, then there would be no one else to direct building visitors if they need to call someone to come down and meet them, because right now visitors are trapped in the lobby.
So she's going to go away from the desk to an office building and deal with a family and register them, and there still won't be anybody at the desk,
No,
will there be?
this desk, this office area would be created just south of the reception desk. I'm envisioning the person could almost slide on a chair with wheels from the one desk into the private office, register, get the family registered, take all the information, and then slide back over and be there to help the next person who may be here to see, another staff member.
So it would be adjacent to.
Right.
Same person.
Same person.
Same
Registering
person.
a family in an office and manning the front desk and
With-
opening the
It works
doors
now.
for people.
Right, within feet of the reception desk now, yes.
I think, so in terms of criteria, I'm just not sure. I would say privacy for these situations would, in my view, cause them to leapfrog some of the other projects that we have on the master list. Not that privacy is not important, but that there also might be, there could be a less expensive option. I don't know that there would be necessarily for roads. If I can also just ask about the security. So I know when we scoped out all of the secure entryways and we secured the doors to the spaces with the students in JEH, I had thought that that was, the extent of the work. And are we revisiting that because it is below the standard?
Yes.
For the actual doors that allow you to enter the building? Is that?
We are revisiting it in light of school security issues, in light of this building not being on par with other buildings where we house students as far as security, visibility, and access goes. I don't want to say too much more.
Well, and again, we use the cameras as a way of documenting events.
Yeah.
And so when a gentleman did some graffiti in one of our schools, we were able to use that information to make some corrections. So I think some of this, again, is around how do we upgrade the operation as it relates to the cameras in the building. But again, it's a good pushback. The actual security, the school here for our littles and the office space for our bigs have latches, and you have to actually use a pass to get in.
Yep. Can I ask about a couple other things? Or do you want to?
Related to this, or?
Related to the capital projects on the list in front of us.
Yes, you may.
So I know the
Please do.
DAW's lighting is not a new topic. Just thinking through the criteria list, what about that project keeps it at the top of our list?
Let me see. The safety and well-being of staff. We have had numerous concerns from teaching staff in that area who are struggling to see during class time in that room. The visibility is very poor. And so we are concerned certainly about the safety and well-being of the staff member and students trying to read in the poorly lit room. So this is not providing stage lights. This is not some fancy, colored light thing that would help, entertain people. If a play were going on, this is really auditorium lighting for the room itself, which is used as a classroom. So it's providing better lighting in a classroom.
Does it replace lighting, or is it?
There's
Augmenting
lighting in there, Don, if you can help me out. It's just very poorly
Well,
lit
it's-
and,
and I think being a teaching space, I think that's the concerns that have been brought to us about, and you're familiar with the school, Mr. Ricketts. I think that's kind of how it was brought to us, is that it's poor lighting when the kids and the teachers are teaching in there. It's hurts their eyes, and it's been a concern for quite some time.
and again, we just got a lower cost estimate, which is on this list, from a local contractor. So this is not doing like auditorium stage lighting. It's strictly providing really what is classroom lighting, if that makes sense. Better lighting.
Then my last question is just about the emergency fund, and I think as long as, whatever projects make it to the board, if that is one of them, I think we just have to be really explicit in the labeling of that item. It's just abundantly clear to the public that it's not just miscellaneous, but that it's, I would call it emergency fund.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's great.
We had a pipe that busted at Dawes a couple months ago,
Yeah.
as I was driving home one night, and we were able to do emergency service and get a plumber in and pay for what we had to pay for. If that pipe had to be replaced, it would have been quite the large bill, and that's the type of emergency fund that we would want to have.
It actually was replaced, but it was only a section
It's a
of
small
it.
piece.
Right.
And that was
right.
$15,000.
Yeah, 15,000 for that. So it's simply, emergency items would be perfectly fine. I was trying to provide a little more description for the bond attorney who's reviewing it, who may want to know what sorts of projects might fall under there. But we would certainly be bringing that to, I'd be bringing that to Dr. Gorin, and he'd be communicating that to the board in those instances. Hopefully, we wouldn't need it. That's our hope.
But we would be notified when there's money used and for what purpose.
Yes.
So then as we go to vote for this,
Yes.
just so that I'm clear, I would personally support the projects minus the locker room and minus the JH registration space. So as you call the vote, that's
Yes.
what I would be willing to support.
Okay.
I
And-
would concur with that, but I did have one more question. On just the list under capital projects, we've got $140,000 for staff supervision costs or supervision, staff costs. And I just wondered, is this something that's allocated among all the projects? Is it something that comes to play only in specific projects? Is it a percentage of? Where does this number come from?
Sure. This includes, we have a maintenance supervisor who oversees our capital projects. So when we have work going on in the buildings, the weekend, whatever time of the day or night, this staff person who works in Don Stevenson's department is responsible for overseeing that work. And so because that is his job responsibility, we are charging his costs to this fund. And then we also have where we have overtime or summer help if they're needed to empty your building, as we will for the asbestos abatement. We have a lot of classrooms and areas that need to be totally emptied so the work can be done, and then they need to be put back in place. So that involves a lot of summer help and then overtime with our custodial staff. So all of those costs are rolled into that line. So it's for all of the projects. But the most labor-intensive ones I can tell you will be the asbestos abatement and flooring replacement. And actually, we have plumbing work in a lot of our buildings, so we're touching a lot of buildings,
So this cost
especially
is
this summer.
normally sort of parsed out among different projects, and you decided to put it all together?
We've always shown this here. We've shown this here for bond expenses going back quite a few years.
How many years, do you know?
I would have to check.
Long time.
Yeah, it's been a while, yeah.
I guess because we're really looking at scrutinizing expenses now is why I noticed it for the first time. Okay.
SUNY.
I am not a member of the Finance Committee, so I won't be voting on any of this today, but I just want to throw out there that the opposition to the Rhodes locker room is a little bit perplexing to me, because I can't think of why that wouldn't be a safety and security concern. If children are being walked in on while they're undressing or are undressed, that's a problem. I'm kind of surprised we've gotten away with it for this long. And if we can address that and make it better with $35,000, I can't understand why we would not do it. I don't see what is a higher priority safety issue than that, quite frankly. So it's, I really and truly don't understand the opposition to that, so.
We just don't know what the space is being used for, so we don't know what we're giving up.
I can't think of what would be a more important use of the space, to be honest. I'm not saying that they're not important things, but to put it another way, if there's a surge at Nichols and we need classroom space, we're not taking the locker rooms away to create classrooms. I can't imagine a situation where we would do that. So I'm not saying that those aren't important and we don't need to figure out how we can still accommodate whatever the space is being used for, but that doesn't negate that having locker rooms is important.
Right.
If we are asking children to get undressed for the curriculum, for what we are asking them to do in the classroom day, how can we do that and not give them a safe place and locked place to do that?
I agree that it is absolutely, we would love them to have locker rooms, but I can't imagine if we didn't have the money, and let's say we just couldn't do it, that we couldn't come up with a creative solution to keep them safe in a room. Put an orange cone in front of the door, put a big sign on the door, cover all the
I
windows.
think
It
sounds like some of that is happening and it hasn't been
But I don't know
working.
if all of that is, and I agree that we should try in every means possible to give them a locker room, but I also don't think it's a question of there's no way we can keep them private in a room that we can close off.
I think it's been attempted for years. I don't believe that if there were some other thing that they could do that would keep kids from getting locked in on, that it wouldn't have already been done. I have a hard time believing that there's any adult in the building who wouldn't have figured out a better way. It sounds like they've tried covering up the windows, they've tried putting signs out there, and it isn't working. So again, I can't think of a more, it just, to me, we're talking about $35,000 to create safe. Every other middle schooler in our district has a safe space to undress for PE. And if
As
we
a
can
private
spend
space.
$35,000 to give that to,
Can I ask a quick question? What happens to this space that they're considering? What happens to the windows that are, because that's a whole
Yeah,
bank
that's-
of windows, and
A
what's,
part of this scope is to also address that too. Part of this $35,000.
and are you taking the windows out?
No, the windows would be there, but they would be covered with a sealant so that there would be no visibility.
Covered with what?
A
A sealant?
They'd be made opaque?
They'd be made, they would be creating privacy panels on the windows so that there would be no visibility in or out of that space.
So is a sealant, is that something you can scrape off?
I would have to talk with the contractor. Don, do you recall?
Do you have a specific concern, Paula?
Well, yeah, because I know middle school kids, and if there's something on if the windows go down to the floor, right? And-
Yes, they do. They do.
Yeah,
They're
I mean, I could
beautiful windows.
imagine them just, if it's a material you can scrape off, they'll do
Scrape it
that.
off, yeah.
And then it'll be exposed to the outside, right?
but I'm sure we can
We can
address
check.
that
Yeah,
and make
we'll-
sure that it
we'll-
isn't
you know,
something
I'm not
we
sure
can
exactly
scrape
what the
off.
material is, but it would be, we just-
Are there, thank you, Sumi, are there other board members who want to offer a point of view on this?
that's a
Should it
different
go forward? If it were,
I actually was gonna ask a different question, but,
Oh.
in terms of this, my first thought is, absolutely, I wouldn't want my kid to be walked in on someone. But I feel like, I guess my real question is, how did this bubble all the way up, and what's the real story? And I'm trying to look at the 5-year work plan, and I don't see it on the 5-year work plan. And so, even though I know we're talking about this, my other thought was, what else is like on the cusp of bubbling up that we might want to talk about while we're talking about, like, what's the other thing? But on another note, I wanted to ask about JEH, and because the pre-K program is here and we're getting that funding, couldn't we use that funding to pay for the registration doesn't apply to pre-K, could we use it?
My understanding is the JEH grant did have some startup costs, and there were some construction pieces of work that was already done. I think a washroom was remodeled and some other stuff like that. But the registration at this desk, my understanding, is not for parents of the Head Start program. It's more for our K-8 parents district-wide. So I believe the Head Start, I don't know if they do their registrations at the home level or in their area, but it's not like every child would qualify for a Head Start program. So And their funding is, because it's federally funded, it's highly monitored, so they're very restrictive on what you can and can't use that funding for.
So,
And I just,
yeah.
if I may, the bubbling up question is a very good one. And so what it behooves for us is, I think we can make the very strong case on emergency issues and then making sure that we're communicating. And then on other issues that are sort of idiosyncratic but are important, a way to communicate that, which is in some ways what we're trying to do now ahead of going to the board. But we can do that over time to actually put that on the table.
I think to kind of echo that, one of the concerns I have is that these projects weren't entertained in the however many millions of dollars of, 5-year plan that we have. Not that they aren't worthy and not that they aren't important, but they aren't currently part of the scope of even set of priorities, including safe entryways, additional safety to entryways. And so I think, when I think of it, I think of, we are adding roughly $200,000 if we were to accept all of these, roughly $200,000 to the ask than what we had expected. When we were talking about this in October, we brought up the option of, should we be adding another safe entryway, at the lower end. We don't know exactly what that will cost, but maybe roughly 80, maybe more than that, because they haven't been projected. So I feel like we have to have fidelity to a process, which means going to having this kind of criteria. And I guess I would agree with Richard. I think privacy and safety are two slightly different things, both important, but safety is somewhat different to me than privacy. And so if we're going to hold to, in an environment of scarce resources, we have to have a set of objective criteria. It's just, I think, the only way that we can function, because all of these are important and good and worthy projects. And but if it has not been contemplated and been through a process before, then it's really hard to put forward that versus something else that has been there and been prioritized before and is sitting. Understanding there's some flexibility we have to have for emergent needs. So I think that's where I am. It would be helpful to still get the information, on alternative use, so that when what we are going to move forward goes to the board, it could then be potentially amended again, right, by the board as a whole. But I think what I'm hearing now is that, based on the committee members here, that we would need to amend the motion that I just moved, right, to reflect the projects that are included here, except for the privacy, JEH registration, privacy office, and the locker renovation.
Candace, before you,
Yes, sure.
can I ask one least of the,
Oh, yes, sure. I'm sorry, we didn't even
Technology
talk about technology.
okay, I know that it's remained
Thought you were-
essentially the same, but the 400,000 has shifted in the way we've categorized it to potential new leases and purchases. And I remember us deciding not to enter into any new leases until we had a comprehensive plan because of we hadn't kind of decided on which devices we were going to want.
So we've been initiating pieces of the tech discovery process. We've been initiating pieces of the tech discovery process over the last couple months. Some of the things that were asked for in that process were really a deep dive into inventory as well as tech expenses. And so, in taking a good look at inventory, staff units, staff units, student units, as well as peripherals, we've come to some of the numbers that were shared in the memo, which, say 17% of our machines are well past due on replenishment. And then we move quickly into, when we look at spending patterns in order to just maintain the level of technology for staff and students, we are not able to do that without extending leases. And so to maintain, we know that leases are necessary. And while we're also continuing then to get smarter about the way we're spending technology, as well as moving forward into what's the vision for technology and how we would wrap that into a tech plan going into next year.
So which are the ones that we're going to renew? Are they?
So are you saying what would we be purchasing potentially with the new lease? Is that what
Yeah.
you're asking? So specifically, what we're looking at are, we have a set of MacBooks that were purchased in 2009, 2010. We don't think we'd replace that one-to-one with MacBooks, but we have specific needs that are addressed by the MacBooks that can't be addressed by Chromebooks. So we're looking at those. And then additionally, we have some other units that are due for replenishment, the first round of Chromebooks, as well as iPads that are in-school iPads, not student iPads. So we're taking a look right now at the kind of use patterns on those and determining which of those would be the right move to replace with a lease. And so we can't replace everything that is beyond its replenishment cycle, even with the lease. This would allow us to decide which items are most in need and then go forward with that. We're also looking at the potential to work with somebody who would buy some of the retired equipment, which could help subsidize some of the purchasing that we need to do, purchasing or leasing that we need to do.
Beyond the iPad pilot, where do we have the iPad?
So we have iPads really in a variety of places. The iPads are the Digital Promise, there's the second grade pilot, and then they also are in a variety of schools. I need to flip over to the inventory document to get to that. But we do, let me just quickly, I can list off for you. Give me 1 second and I can give you detail. So we have iPads currently, we have them at Shoot, we have them at Dawes, we have them at Dewey. And again, we've gotten them a couple different places, but the ones that would be 2012 are at Haven, Nichols, we've got some at Rhodes, Rice. We also have them at Dewey, Dewey, Kingsley, Orrington, Rhodes. And then there are actually a whole nother column so essentially, if I were to put it all together, we have iPads that were purchased 2012 or earlier in almost every one of our schools that are in use right now with students. And the challenge with the iPads too is that they've upgraded the operating system significantly. We're not going to be able to continue to upgrade the operating system on the iPads that were 2011, 2012. So we can't continue to upgrade the iPads and keep them operational.
Yeah, they use the iPads like in the science classes. Special ed has a lot of the iPads that are being used right now. Also, in the second grade, they're using the iPads.
With the pilot?
Correct.
In what second grade?
There are second grades that have carts, and I don't know the full status of them, but there are a lot of second grades across the district that do have carts.
I'm glad you're raising this because I did want to talk more about the technology, and I just want to understand because one of the factors here that's driving the decision is the concept of the defined life cycle. Can you share specifically more about that?
Yes. So, and essentially what we've done is we've taken a look at all of our equipment and we've defined basically what we see as being a fair life cycle or replenishment cycle. When we take a look at the MacBooks, we say essentially that the replenishment cycle for MacBooks is 5 years. As we're getting close to that 5-year window, we take a look at the quality of equipment and we try to decide if we can sustain it for another year based on what's going to be the cost of upkeep, all of those different things. So we've defined basically a life cycle for all the different equipment that we have in the district: MacBooks, iMacs, Chromebooks, Chromeboxes, Chromebases, iPads that are in school, and iPads that are going back and forth with students because that's going to shift their life cycle. And we have that defined for all of the devices, and we're watching, essentially when that replenishment is going to come up. And that's what we're basing the numbers that we have tonight. And I could read them off to you if you want them, where we are right now. And especially with the Chromebooks, as we come up on these, we're going to determine if our defined life cycle right now is the right life cycle for those. Because this is going to be the first time that we're hitting the end of life cycle for our Chromebooks.
Sure.
So we set it, we evaluate it, and then make the best decision we can on whether we sustain it or replace it.
And I just want to share context because this is the first time that you've been engaged in this conversation, for a technology approval. This is the 5th time I've been involved in this conversation, and each year I say, next year I'm not going to vote for it unless we have a plan that aligns technology with curriculum. And so, this is the fourth time I'm in that situation of, and knowing that you didn't have the charge to have that done, I don't think, by this point in time. And you've been here 5 months or something, and it's not the only thing you have been tackling. And I struggle with this because it's, of all the projects that we've got listed here, it is by far the largest item. And we obviously have to keep things operational, and it can't just be barely operational, right? We don't want productivity to get slowed down. We don't want children's time to be, wasted because the processing is moving too slowly or anything like that. But yet it's such a big number. So I'm not getting to a conclusion here. I'm just expressing my, the challenge that I have in looking at this number in the absence of a more complete strategy.
And I appreciate that comment, and I can sense the frustration. What I can say is we're trying to move forward on the items that were identified as part of the tech discovery process, which is let's get a better understanding of the funds, where they're going within technology, and we've got a pretty good breakdown on that right now. We've got a great sense of inventory. And my real concern is that if we can't keep moving forward on the leasing of technology, we're at a point where we've got units that have got to roll out of schools because we can't maintain them with new operating systems, and that's going to have a negative impact on students' access to technology. We clearly have work to do in defining what's the vision of technology in teaching and learning, but I feel that we have to sustain access for our teachers and students as we're doing that work. And so, we're moving forward on those items, and I think we're back in front of the board in May around a technology update. But when we, initially we had the conversation, it came to my attention that we were talking about not leasing. We spent a lot of time on this inventory, and I have a very serious concern that if we don't lease, we have very limited purchasing power, and our students are not going to have the same access to technology. Additionally, staff units, all of our teachers' machines are entering they're in their fourth year now. If we delay leasing, we're going to just further back up the burden that we have about maintaining the access to technology in the district.
So I'll just add one thing and then I'll stop. So another piece that you missed is last year, whenever this came to the board, in this room, several of us said, we're not going to support it unless we have a strategy in place. I know we're not there, so I guess what I would look to you, Paul, and say, when this comes back next year, will we have a strategy in place that addresses, the instructional technology approach that we need to take?
So, and Stacey, you can help on this as well. What we agreed to was that we would do the year of learning and exploration, and that's where we're right now, and that's where you have all the details. And then that would lead into a plan, and that would be a plan that would be aligned, and that should fall by a year from now to be able to come back.
Right. And the defined process was tech discovery into tech plan. I don't know if I can tell you, and I don't think we'd have a complete and finalized tech plan by this point of next year, but I do think we can have a very clear vision, lots of details, all of those things, because we have to figure out, there's a process to the tech plan. But if we're told, hey, we have to, then we just might need to find a way to do it. We can definitely be much further along in the process and have that vision of technology and the bigger picture. Whether it's completely wrapped and final, we'd have to figure out that.
If we approve this, then are we saying we're going to just teacher computers aside, because they're used for all sorts of things, but what the students use, we're just going to keep on doing the same curriculum? We're not going to change anything in the curriculum? We're just going to...
So this ask is separate of curriculum. Right now we are piloting ST Math, which is, computer-based. We're looking at some other potential opportunities, things that we could potentially access for next year. There's an interesting opportunity through Digital Promise, things along those lines. This would say we're going to maintain the units so that we have access to the technology to maintain the same level of access. The use will determine. I've been working with the district standing committee, and we've been going through the software subscriptions. We have opted not to renew 4 or 5 different subscriptions. I'm hoping to be able to use that money in order to identify what is of greater interest for teachers as well as leaders, and be able to meet that need with some of the money that we're saving by not renewing subscriptions right now. So we have a district standing committee that is involved in conversation about the software spend or the subscription spending. We're doing significant work on literacy framework. We're doing some significant work on RTI, all of which could potentially benefit from the accessibility of technology. But that's, so we're maintaining it so that we can continue to think about the best ways to use it within the classroom. And with technology, we do tend to evolve from one thing to the other as new things become available.
But what we get will determine, I think what I'm hearing you say is that what the software, the hardware that we get will determine what our curriculum is rather than the curriculum, no?
No, because, so what we're looking at is, we're bringing more, we're replacing the existing equipment. We can run a variety of online options using iPads or Chromebooks, things along those lines. The MacBooks are an interesting one because there are some things that specifically for special education really only run on Macs, and so that's why, we probably won't replace the two carts, but we definitely think we need to replace one because there are some platform-specific things that we need to maintain there. But a lot of the other devices, a lot of the other programs, applications, web-based learning, all of those types of things can run across platforms. So the ability to purchase and replace technology within the district won't limit us in our curricular decisions. It will create the availability. Each time we come through with a pilot, we have to think about, well, can the Lincolnwood classroom that's piloting ST Math get enough access to the technology to determine if that solution is going to work well for kids? In the case, so we need to make sure that the technology availability is there for teachers to continue to do many of the things they're doing, and for us to continue to think about new ways in which we can integrate technology into teaching and learning that are going to help our students. Okay?
Can I ask a more specific question? And I'm wondering, students can't take the Park on the iPad, correct? Or do we have keyboards that allow it?
Yeah, so there is a way that students could take them on the iPad, but it requires an external keyboard and a number of things.
Yeah, that we don't have.
So Joe, you can talk to that a little bit.
They have taken.
They have?
Yes.
Because of the renewing of the technology, the iPad sort of is the one that seems to me as the most discretionary because they don't seem to, maybe our whole classroom's taking it on the iPad, or is it for adapted testing?
There is schools that are taking it just all on iPads, but we had to provide them with all keyboards for all of them.
And so was that any less costly? Was that a lot cheaper than?
Than Chromebook?
Chromebook.
Yes, it is cheaper than a Chromebook if you put those two together, yes.
Because I feel like we're still supporting these three different, I don't know, I'm not a technologist, so
Two
platforms.
platforms.
And that concerns me because I would hope that when we have a plan, we will be like the high school and decide this is going to be what, and I'm sure with special ed and other, there will be needs at different ages, but as a district and to continue on all three fronts to go forward, I think that.
Yeah, the only complaint that I heard, is taking it on the iPad is the screen size when taking a test instead of the Chromebook, which is, 2-3 inches bigger than the iPad is.
I think one piece on that, Tracy, too, is we are working with kids that are 5 to 14 or 5 to 15, and so the Chromebooks work pretty well when kids are working on publishing papers in middle school, things along those lines. However, when you have a kindergartner, first grader, second grader, the iPad is a really easy device and interface for them to be learning on. So, when we go about creating a plan, we definitely will look at what's the right equipment, but we may not arrive at there's one right answer because our kids really travel a huge, trajectory, and we'll need to think about, yes, ETHS and Chromebooks. However, our 5-year-olds also have a set of needs, and there are certain interfaces that allow them to access learning in a much better way.
Have we gotten good feedback on the pilot?
So there is good feedback on the pilot. You can see the growth. You can see a lot of the use that's happening in classrooms. We are doing our best right now to really kind of begin to capture that and really put together findings to be able to share with the board.
Yeah.
And I assume when you say that you're talking digital promise, or are you talking about the second grade pilot?
I'm talking about the second grade pilot.
So that I need to do a little bit more digging on, frankly.
Because that's sort of been floating out there, and no one's ever had a sense of how those are being used or if they're being used effectively. And I think some feedback we've gotten is perhaps they're not. So that's why I have a little bit of concern. I'm not
And I
sure.
think it varies room to room, to be honest.
What?
In various places.
What did?
You looked at me, I'm not sure.
Oh, no, I thought you were saying something. So I
Yeah.
think
No,
that's.
I have to do some more looking at
Yeah.
that. I do know places where they're used very well, but I can't speak to it as a pilot as a whole at this point.
And again, I just want to reiterate that we agreed that we would do this year a discovery process. The discovery process will lead into the plan. That will get to alignment of our curricular and instructional vision and goals and how to use the tools. And I recognize also the frustration that you present, Richard, and we can accelerate as fast as we can, and but we don't want to just hop over and say, oh, whoops, we don't have the machines that we need right now. And so it's a leap to be able to think that a year from now we'll be in a much better place to be able to be even more articulate about where we're going from a vision and execution of that vision.
And perhaps even next year, we'll be looking at approving this through a different part of our finances if we move it into the operating budget. I mean,
that's also one of the goals.
And so as part of your proposal, I know the board has talked about that. We've sort of flirted with that for a while. I think that will be important for you to share. Are we looking at running this through capital or through operating?
Right, and we can talk about that with some projections later on, and we can move forward. But I also just want to underscore the work that Stacy's doing with the standing committee is really important, and so the ability to be able to engage in this process is something that will help us be better as we move forward.
If there was any way we could reduce potential new leases purchases from the 400,000 it is now and have some more specifics, because it reads to me like miscellaneous, to be quite honest. It's about as vague as that. It's kind of like.
So we do, and we could come back with more information on our intent to purchase. We have a couple options. We've been working, Joe's team has worked out to a 5-year plan, but what we need to do is take, as I mentioned, we want to take a good look at the state of the iPads that are past the replenishment cycle as well as the Chromebooks and make the best possible purchasing decision. Joe's team is also trying to figure out how we balance this out a little bit over time, because what we see in the patterns around, we've been purchasing in very large chunks, and so that makes it hard to kind of stabilize the spending. And so we're also trying to figure out, if we have a whole bunch of Chromebooks coming due, how do we kind of balance this out over several years? Because one, it'll make our spending a little bit more even, and second, it will also support the technology team as they're rolling out new technology to be able to provide better service. And so we have a 5-year plan, but as I said, we have defined replenishment cycles, and our job is also then to take a look and say, this was the replenishment cycle, is this the right call right now? And so they're taking a look at both of those, because we can't replace everything, even with the leasing option, that would be due for replacement at the end of this year. So we have to decide how to best spend that money.
So could we, if we move the expense, the $400,000 forward, I think what we had done last year, and so maybe we could do that as well, is we approved the bond sale, but we brought this discussion back to approving the actual funding allocation for the technology piece. It was more related to the software and services component, I believe, last year. But we could do the same thing for the leases purchase at, in April or May, I don't know, at some point before you have to go out and purchase, you tell us, but have the more detail on specifically what are we purchasing?
Absolutely.
And what's the balance of those? I think that would be very helpful so that we'll get clarity and we can compare that to the replenishment cycle. Would that be amenable to folks doing it that way? So then we can take another look.
And that works logistically from Mary's end, because in order to post the bond sales, we would want to move forward, and then we can figure out what we're going to do, whether we're going to buy or not.
Yeah, I think.
Or lease.
My only kind of trailing concern is are we hamstringed to the devices if we and maybe that depends on how you do the leasing. So to the balance of Chromebook to iPad, maybe in the next year we decide we need to up the number. up the number of iPads or up this, is there a way after you have leased to swap, depending on who the leasing entities are? I don't know, but are we hamstring to those specific devices over the course of the lease once you've leased them, or is there any interplay? Because that would be the only kind of concern. I understand that typically most of this software is going to be agnostic. You should be able to use it cross-platform, but we might strategically decide based on the experience for students at a younger age or an older age, we want to, way heavier than when our balance is. How do we retrofit that in? Is it possible to do with those leases we take out, or do you have to just do that with the new leases after that?
Once you lease the equipment, because of the way things depreciate, it's going to be your equipment for the lifetime of the lease. I don't see us being constrained by platforms.
Okay.
And especially more and more, the types of things that are happening in schools aren't necessarily constrained by platforms. There are limitations of what iPads can do and Chromebooks can do, but we also, among the district and with the range of ages of learners, I think we can create a plan that uses the variety of technology well.
Okay. Okay. Everybody good with the questions now? Okay, so I think we are back to amending the motion to include all the projects as outlined with the exception of the privacy, JEH privacy construction and the roads locker room renovation.
So do we need to make that official amendment? Or was?
If that's what we're sending the board.
I thought that's what I was doing.
Yeah. I
It
second.
wasn't official enough?
I second that motion.
Okay. Yes.
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 Okay. Thank you all. So we will now move to the next part of our discussion around projections, and then we can roll in any questions or discussion you wanted to have on referenda to that.
Is transportation next?
Oh, I'm sorry.
So sorry.
If we can.
Yes, we
pause
should
on
do
the-
transportation.
and-
Because I think there might have been people here
Yeah.
around the transportation discussion, so I'm sorry about that.
So if I can start on the transportation
This
conversation.
must be really fun for you.
When we last met, we offered some proposals for changes in our transportation activities and systems. And in the board discussion, which was a very good discussion, along with a very good community input, the push that we received as an administrative team was to think of the whole, not a component part, or component parts as we were presenting. And to really do a more holistic and focused and more holistic study of transportation writ large across the district. How are we transporting? How many kids? What do the routes look like? Could we find efficiencies in a different way as opposed to offering what we did, which was several places where we thought we would have efficiencies. And we were lucky enough to have as part of our audience Dr. Candance Chow, who was here wearing multiple hats. We didn't know the hat that she was wearing, which I'll explain in a second, but we absolutely respected the hat as a parent of students at Kingsley, and who offered some great and appreciated friendly critique that helped us think anew. And then Karen actually said, oh, and by the way, I'm a professor at the Northwestern University, and I have an expertise in logistics and transportation, and all things that we were really trying to tackle. So I think by the next morning, we had set up an appointment, and we started a conversation around not only the issues that we were presenting in terms of some of our routing, but our issues across the district in terms of how we actually think about the routing, what we can learn from the processes, and how we can take a deep dive. And so with great appreciation to Karen and to the School of Engineering and to Northwestern, we've struck up a wonderful partnership where we can take some deep dives into the system and really learn from those with deep expertise around how to think about what our next steps would be. And so I just wanted to make sure that, one, out of that conversation came what is just so wonderful about living in Evanston and then serving that slice of Skokie is that the parents and the community members and the members of the university environment are really here as partners to help us move forward. And so I just want to officially tip my hat to you first as a parent, thank you very much for entrusting your children with us, but as an expert in the field, and then to just formally thank the administration of Northwestern for the ability to do the type of partnering that we're just entering in. And I think this is going to be a long-standing partnership if we have our way. So let me turn it to Mary, who's going to do a little more preface, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you, Dr. Gorin, and thank you, Dr. Smilowitz, for joining us this evening. As Dr. Gorin said, we are very excited to be working with Dr. Smilowitz and her team from Northwestern. We've had, with Jordan Ryan here, thank you for joining us as well. We have had a couple of meetings with Dr. Smilowitz and her team, and she's going to speak shortly about the overview and kind of the timeline for the various phases of her project. But initially, what we're bringing forward is a survey just to gather some initial data from parents. And we do want to send the word out that please fill out these surveys. They're being available online and in school buildings during parent-teacher conferences this very week. Northwestern and District 65 certainly do want to hear from parents, so please respond to the survey. So I just want to put that plug out there. And I think I'll just turn it over to Dr. Smilowitz to kind of provide an overview on the project and review the timelines, if she could. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. So as Dr. Gorin said, I'm a Kingsley parent. So this started as me just saying, well, I'll take some laptops and count cars at Kingsley, because there was some concern that the lack of buses would increase our transportation. And I think Dr. Gorin might have Googled me at that point and said, well, really, I want you to come and talk about routing and logistics. So this is my area of research, and I've worked with a lot of community partners as well, looking at how to increase the efficiency of their transportation routes. And so if you see in the packet, what we put together when we started meeting the joint teams between District 65 and Northwestern, is to come up with this 3-stage plan. So the first stage, I'm going to go on the Northwestern quarter system. The first 2 quarters is really to take a step back and just look at the transportation system. And so to think about, where are the buses? Are the buses maxing out on capacity by time, by the number of students? How far are students traveling to the bus stops? How does that differ across the district? So there's a couple of studies within that first stage, that first just get more information about what's going on. So we've been doing a lot of work back in Northwestern analyzing the routes. So there's a tremendous amount of data in Versatrans in the routing software, but how do you tease out what's actually happening from that data? And that's what wonderful students that I brought with me today, what we're looking at. One of our biggest priorities from the start was to get this survey out by this week. We really wanted to have it by parent-teacher conferences. It was really important that it not just be an online survey, and so that parents could do a hard copy, and we thought the best way to do that was parent-teacher conferences. So please encourage everyone, I'm reaching to all the parents here too, not just if you take the bus. We really want to know not just about parents whose children take the bus, but just even about walking in the district or driving. How do you make the choice to walk versus drive? How does that differ across? And the survey is also a way for people to give us feedback. So I think a lot of really good ideas are coming out from the parents, from the families, and the survey is one way for that to filter to us. And then we'll be doing some work on best practices. One of the parents who's helping out is also an urban planner, and she's going to help us there. And then, like I said, just doing some analysis, running the numbers on what's happening on the buses. So that's going to be stage 1, and then stage 2, starting this summer, is, the way that Dr. Gorin posed this to me was, first, within the constraints, what can we do? And that's kind of our plan over the summer, is how do we work within the budget constraints and the other constraints within the district to try to come up with a more efficient system. And then stage 3 is thinking larger picture than there, going out from there, and we've talked about doing some joint grant proposals between the district and Northwestern, because that stage 3, what's nice about stages 1 and 2 is this is stuff that we can do on a pretty small budget. We've got wonderful students. But as we start looking to stage 3, we're going to look at how do we reach out to maybe the National Science Foundation or some other foundations. Northwestern Foundation Relations has been helping me identify sources and thinking about how do we make a bigger project. And like Dr. Gorin said, making this just one of many projects between the district and the engineering school. So I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Before we open it up, I want to say as well, on behalf of the Finance Committee and the board, thank you so much to all of you for this work and for partnering. And it is another testament to what a great community we live in, so that we can turn that frown upside down and move from being disappointed to trying to make improvements. So thank you. So why don't we, if we have questions about the study at hand, as well as Dr. Gorin, might you also speak to how does this work then impact any changes or movement on transportation that we are going to make? So just to give us an idea of what this timetable looks like, and relative to the recommendations that were being brought forward for, how it alters that or shifts when we might be making decisions. I think that would be helpful for folks as context to the questions.
What we believe right now is that as we move forward into the next budget year, what we were suggesting was a way to mitigate against future financial issues, and we'll be talking about that in a few minutes. And we can handle the busing system as we have right now through next budget year without problem. We may find as we do, starting in stage 1 or stage 1 and sort of going into stage 2, that there might be some obvious, in my vernacular, no-brainers to be able to make some slight tweaks to what we're doing. I don't think we would do substantial tweaks until we're ready to really look at the system as a whole, and that was the feedback that we got. So I think for next budget year, we would be, if we make any changes, they would be slight changes to the bus pickups, if at all, but not the major changes that we would do. Mary, other ways to articulate that?
Sure.
I think after speaking with Northwestern, their study is going to involve work into next year, and so we felt it was prudent to wait until we have their recommendations looking at on a system-wide basis before we did come forward with any drastic changes. As Dr. Gorin suggested, we may possibly change some pickup locations for next year, but those would be small changes. We're not proposing any changes to the amount of children who are bused at this point for next year.
And then the other part of this which was our set of initial conversations, were the parameters by which we bus. And so there's parameters for safety, there's parameters for magnet schools, there's parameters for historical reasons as it relates to integration. And so these are pieces that we want to be absolutely sensitive to and throw into the equation that you and your colleagues will have, so that as we think about the different routings that we have and how we might think of more efficient routings, which should maximize or minimize the time on the bus, maximize the efficiency of the bus, and we believe maximize the costs for busing, that we can actually, we can pay attention to all of those variables. And so that's the exciting thing, because you've done that for other people and places and companies around the country and the world, if I'm not mistaken. And so so to be able to actually focus on that here, so that the long-winded answer to your question, Candace, is that while we enter into next year's budget proposals, what I'm expecting is that we will have enough information to be articulate in a very coordinated way on where we might, if we have to make changes or major changes to transportation, that we have that backed up by in-depth research that we've done with our colleagues. Is that a fair?
That's it.
Way to, okay.
Great. We should, before we do discussion, if there is there anyone else in the audience who want to make a comment around transportation up front? No? No, okay. So then let's, does anybody have questions?
I have a
Yes.
question that's not, we had talked about the fact, and Jordan, I'm looking to you to correct me if my memory here, that our buses were determined by the number of children eligible to ride them as opposed to the number of children that actually did ride them. And then we were talking about making some changes because there's so far, it's like half the number of kids that actually do ride that versus, at least in this, we have fewer children riding than that are eligible to ride.
That are eligible?
Right.
Correct, and we
Yeah, on page
have
33.
made adjustments to the routes. We're able sometime, at a few schools, we've added 3 routes since beginning of school, I think it says somewhere in there. But haven't been able to decrease. Well, we have fewer buses than last year, but haven't been able to specifically decrease a bus because of the eligibility. But we have been taking stock of those numbers and getting those kids off the routes to make them more efficient.
I know what it was. We were talking about trying to get a firm commitment from families.
Right.
And are we going to proceed with that, or are we going to wait till the end of
That
this?
is my plan still for this year, so hopefully,
For the next school year.
within the next month, be getting the confirmation form out to families so that we have some time while we're still in school
Mm-hmm.
and get a better success rate with the confirmation forms with the purpose of going forward with that.
And let me underscore that, because where we were about to make that leap was last summer, or we even did, and when we made the leap to try to find who are the actual writers, who's making the commitment to actual writing, we were concerned that we weren't reaching everybody, and so that it would have come as a surprise on August 15th, the family would actually wake up and say, "Where's my bus?"
And there was no bus.
And we may have eliminated that family from the bus route because they were eligible, but they haven't been actual. And so we're doing this way in advance.
Way in advance and even changing some of the portions of the form to hopefully get a better response rate, have a yes or no, so that we know, did we not receive a confirmation form, or do you not want busing?
Right.
So, yeah, both of
Okay,
those.
so that work is going forward.
Yes.
Excellent.
Do the numbers here of eligible and actual writers, though, reflect, are they, for example, at my bus stop, I know that there's a large number of students who technically are not eligible for bus service, but they do have permission from the principal to ride the bus. Are those numbers reflected in this at all? Are we accounting for
They're
that kind of
in here.
ridership? They are in here?
Yes.
Okay.
Can you
does
say
that
more
mean,
about that? That's just a curious statement.
It's because there is a route that comes by. There is a portion
Okay.
of,
So we,
basically Noyes Street is like the divider. So south of Noyes is eligible for the bus route, but not north. But there are people who live just north who get permission to be on the bus.
so it is my understanding that in certain routes, and actually specifically speaking to your school in particular, there has been a past practice of kids in a certain area getting to ride the bus. And so this year, the decision was made because we didn't recognize this till after the school year started, that we wouldn't take them off the bus this year because they had no warning that they were not going to get to use the bus.
And there was space
So-
available.
There is space available.
Right, and yeah, these are not full buses that they're getting on. They're not displacing any other riders. So so you're saying they're not going to be allowed to ride the bus next year?
No, I think that next year, any parent I talked to, I even said, this year we can go ahead because we realized that you had no idea you weren't actually eligible for the bus, or maybe didn't know. But that going forward, we would make that.
That would not be the
decision.
case.
Yeah.
That they will actually, so there will be no getting permission from anybody.
I mean, maybe we could offer for families that aren't in the eligible area that they could pay for transportation. I wouldn't, we'd have to discuss that, but I think that would be a fair option to present.
And this
Well,
is
I
where the
think
study
that
comes
sits
in,
under the
knowing,
rubric of the
Yep.
larger study
Yep.
going forward.
and knowing, are the buses maxing out by distance or by number of students, by
Right.
load? And so the more we know about that, the more we can look into things like
I guess I'm just suggesting that if there is going to be a change made to that, and I don't know to the extent that it's an issue on any other bus routes. My guess is that it's probably mostly,
to my knowledge.
that at least that parents get notification by
Yeah.
But-
if they are
but again-
writers now.
Correct.
Well reminded that we need to look at the whole. What Karen just said was actually really important, that in the science of doing this work, and I trust you, Professor, to help us out, that there may be a new way of thinking about the buses so that are they maximizing in terms of their load? Are they maximizing in terms of their efficiency to run the route in a speedy fashion? Because that's the other tremendous complaint that we get, that a child is on a bus for 45, 50, 55 minutes, and he's little, and that's just really hard. So is there a way to take the file that we gave you of all of the routes that look like a mess of spaghetti and make them much more rational, and make them efficient? And at that point, then we may be able to offer an available seat to somebody who's ineligible but who can pay, or we may not, actually, if that slows down the route. And so we're going to have to figure all that out.
Just a couple observations and questions. Page 33, the eligible and actual riders, which was really good to see. Just observation, about a third of the actual riders come from Rhodes and King Arts. And so those are, families that, because of the magnet school, are opting into that. What it raises for a question for me is, can we also, the next time that this data comes to us, whenever that is, identify by other programs too, which riders, so as we're looking at TWE and ACC or ELL or whatever, just so that we know which riders are being driven not just by geography, but by program. I mean, driven is probably not the right verb to use there, but the reason they're taking the bus is because of program.
And we are working on that kind of table.
Great. And then I just see additional reviews of these schools are in process. Is that this research or is that something else?
Nope, that's actually going to the schools and counting kids that get.
Okay.
So at all the other schools, we have physically done that in some form or fashion. These 4 schools, we're still making appointments to go and count those kids.
Okay. And, you don't have to answer this, but I am just curious, that your research may answer this, why some percentages for schools are so high, right, of the actual versus eligible. Some, it's very high. Like Washington is very low, and Dewey looks exceptionally high. It's like 94% or whatever it is, 92.5%. So I'm just curious about that. What might be causing that?
Jordan, when you ask parents to declare affirmatively or not if they want the bus, are you going to be also asking that of parents who aren't eligible? That would take care of the question that you raised. So you don't. So if you don't get this question or this, this registration form if you're not eligible.
Correct. And I do apologize. I told you they were included. They are not included in this. I misspoke. So the kids we're talking about are not officially routed anywhere in Versatrans, so they would not be included in this spreadsheet.
Are they
How many kids
big
are we
numbers?
talking about? I mean, that's really,
It could be 10 or 12.
I think it's 13. I mean, I think I know the answer.
So, they're-
It's about like half our bus stop though.
Yeah, give or take.
Okay.
And that's, I think, a point of the study too, right? Is that to take it from the stories that we hear to actually looking back at the whole system and seeing what's going on.
That would be great, thank you.
Others here at the table have questions?
Sounds good. I'm glad to see it. I almost feel like we should take the framework and apply it to every other problem we have in the district. Come up with the assessment.
Find someone to work with.
that is the approach.
Yeah, we should. I mean, it's, it sounds like a good partnership, and it sounds like it'll yield some good results.
And I do hope it does lead to more projects, because I think that, across the university, and I'm from the engineering school, and we're always looking to help out, so.
Aaron, do you want to introduce your students?
Yes, I
think
do.
it'd be
Well,
great.
can I let them introduce themselves real quick?
Hi, everyone. My name is Aaliyah. I'm a senior studying industrial engineering, and I'm from Los Angeles.
Oh, great.
And you have a big job that you're going to, you're graduating with a big job in the engineering field.
Yes, I'm graduating in December, and I'm working at A.T. Kearney in the Procurement and Analytic Solutions Department, starting next February.
Great, congratulations.
Already got a job.
We have some procurement issues that we'd like to.
Hi everyone, my name is Yue. I am a junior. I study industrial engineering, and then I'm working with Professor Smilowitz.
Great. Thank you. And I do just want to acknowledge, if we look at the page 32, which is the late routes versus total routes. I know we probably all looked at this, but just to call it out because it's a significant improvement as we look at how this year has progressed. If just comparing to September and January had about the same number of routes. September there were 65 late routes, and January there were 2. That seems like a pretty good improvement. So, well done. I mean, we should, as much as we've talked about how problematic it is, we need to celebrate when things have really moved in a really positive direction.
And on that note, the Safe Stop app that we have been talking about for a very long time is going to be launched next Tuesday to parents. We have everything ready. So it's been up and running for a couple of weeks, and the local depot is, ironing out their details with that and figuring out how to. They have the capability of posting like notices that there'll be a sub-driver on this route today to families. So they're practicing those kinds of things. And it will also, so where I was going with that, it will also be logging every route when it arrives at the school every day. So we'll have a much more accurate picture of what that will look like, which could be a good or a bad thing. So we'll see.
Nice information.
But the schools won't
It's
be logging
accurate
that anymore, so that's really great for the schools.
Board member Jennifer Phillips is traveling for work, so she's not able to be here, but I know if she were, she would say thank you, because she's very passionate about the app.
Yeah, well, it is a great thing, and we're, I think, in the first 25 school districts in the country to be using it, so we're quite progressive.
Yeah, that's true. Well, and it's great. To what Richard was saying, I look at the snapshot that we have of the late routes, and my conclusion is that we're doing a better job of management reporting this year, much better job. Not that we necessarily had more late routes, but the management reporting is better. And so I thank you for that, and it sounds like it will get even more precise if we're going to have, if we're going to have an app that tells us that data, so we don't have to rely on, the schools, which have a lot of other things to do to report the late routes. So thank you for that. I had one request for you all to think of as you're doing a combination of the best practice work is for us to be able to look at just a, kind of a baseline metric of cost per rider as we're going for actual rider, and what our current costs, our current costs look like. Do we have any comparison points of other benchmarks, of other districts, of other similar in geography, because that kind of dictates, what our footprint is. Because I find it's very difficult to say, yeah, we spend too much or we don't spend enough. I mean, when you have nothing to compare it against. And so then we can look at that over time as we're looking to gain more efficiencies. Is our cost per rider going down? How does that cost per rider, quite frankly, how does it compare to what we're charging in the case of where we do charge for services, or if we're contemplating charging for services at some point, then we have a point of comparison of what our actual costs are. So if you could put that into the mix, that would be very helpful, because now we have a big step up of actually getting closer to knowing what our actual ridership is, so we can look at those costs across the riders. Does anyone else have questions? I think we just a heartfelt thank you, and we're so looking forward to the work and the fruits of our labor.
Back and sharing some data with you.
We like data.
We like data. Great. Wonderful. So now I have quite a track record of skipping agenda items, don't I? Because my eyes are so bad. So now we are moving into the discussion item on financial projections, FY 17 to 21. So once again, I'll turn to the left.
Thank you, Candace. We have a brief PowerPoint discussion. I actually have additional copies of the PowerPoint if anyone needs a copy, and then we'll take questions.
Okay.
And I would like to start with some financial highlights. District 65 is among 20% of school districts in Illinois with balanced budgets. So that means that 80% of school districts function with deficits budgets. Last year, district adopted a strategic planning with a financial goal of ensuring long-term financial stability. This slide, this pie chart, illustrates districts' operating revenues, and you can see that we rely heavily on local property taxes. 76% of our revenue comes from local dollars. We also rely quite heavily, much more than the state, because the state average is about 8%, rely on state aid. Almost 11% comes from state sources, which is now, we know there's a big question mark related to state funding. Moving on to assumptions for major revenue sources. The growth in property taxes is determined by the tax cap law, which basically means last year extension, which is the amount, can increase by 5% or the CPI, whichever is less. We know the CPI for calendar year 2014 was 0.8%, under 1%, and the CPI for 2015 calendar year, which was just released in January of 2016, is even lower. It's 0.7, and it's the second lowest CPI on record. And that's going to determine the additional revenues that we will be receiving in next fiscal years, fiscal year 17 and 18. There's some additional dollars from new construction, but it's very small. It's only a 7.5 million value, not dollars, and that has been revised down from $12 million, used to be 12 million, except for the 2 years in which we have TIFs. Corporate personal property replacement tax is projected to increase by 2.5 revenues, and there are similar increases projected for local revenues, and we do not have TIF surplus revenues in our projections. We did receive a surplus payment after the budget was approved for the current year, which is being used to prepay some of the 2017 expenditures. This slide illustrates new property. So you can see 7.5 value in the lighter blue color, which stands for projected, except for levy year 2016 and 18, which have TIF revenue, Howard Hartree and Washington National TIFs. These TIFs will be expiring, and District 65 will be receiving additional dollars. This slide illustrates CPI, and you can see the downward trend in the CPI. What was changed in our projection is the CPI for the future years. It used to be 2%, which was just slightly under 10% average. We are revising it based on the latest data to 1.5, which is actually very conservative. I know it looks very optimistic here to the 0.7 and 0.8, but it's actually very conservative. It's a 5-year average. The new 10-year average is 1.8%. We decided to go with more conservative option, again, because what's been happening with the gasoline prices and obviously CPI.
So the financial analysts recommended a higher average CPI of 1.8, which is lower than our 2.0 that we've been doing for a long period of time. So we've lowered it at least to
I'm
1.5.
glad you did.
Yeah.
Because I think we've raised that question for a couple of years.
Correct, and that's,
And so,
And the 5-year, could you go back to that slide?
5-year average.
The 5-year average.
It's
include-
1.5%.
Yeah, I know, but does it include that one? I can't see.
I know it's very hard
The
to see.
ones, where does it, goes back to 2012? 2012?
Yes.
Okay.
So there is a high year in that
So,
five-year average.
so but the trend, the 4-year trend is much lower.
Right, so
than that.
depending what happens next year, the new
We
5-year
would revise
average will
again.
be probably even lower.
Yeah.
State revenues, I know there are a lot of questions. There's a lot of uncertainty with state dollars. There is a Senate Bill 1, former Senate Bill 16, which is basically redistribution of and change in state funding formula. Just recently, there was an EASB proposal which will decrease our state dollars for special education. These are not being included in the projections because they are proposals and they've been floating around for a while. We were also told by our financial advisor to stick with the 92 proration and the original foundation level for GSA, which is $6,119. So that's what we're putting in. But we are including these, the impact of these proposals in the alternative scenario. So I mean, we're tracking it very closely, but again, because there is no past legislation, we're not putting it in. Also next year, because of the downward trend in the student population classified as low income, you probably saw a decrease in the state aid, and that's what's increasing this deficit for next year. State categorical basically flat, federal aid 2.5% increase. This slide illustrates our operating expenditures. Again, this is not new. This is very typical for Chicago metro area. Over 80% of our revenues is going to staffing, salaries, and benefits. Because our employees' contracts expire at the end of this fiscal year, cost of salaries and benefits is estimated. We are including 15 certified and retirement in the current, for the fiscal year 17, even though they are retired at the end of this year, but the savings will be realized next year, and 11 in the subsequent years. Benefits with health insurance, we are putting 6% for now, but it's a preliminary number, so I believe it will probably come down a little bit, and 5% for subsequent years. What's new is the cost of the ERO. We have 5 employees retiring under the early retirement options. It's a very costly option. It's going to cost the district approximately $800,000, which is also our cap. This ERO is projected to sunset at the end of this year, but we believe, and what we are hearing, Mary and I, that it's going to be probably extended because it doesn't cost the state anything. And of course, we are stuck with the cost at the end, so we are putting a cost in projections for subsequent years, about $500,000, which was our average cost per year until recently. And then another change, no pension cost shift is included in projections. We had it last time, but again, it's another of these legislations. The state is trying to push that cost to local school districts. We are watching that, but we're keeping it in the alternative scenario. This slide illustrates assumption for non-personnel expenditures. On average, you can see that they are increasing by approximately 2.5%. One thing to point out with capital outlay, in fiscal year 17, it is, even though the amount is not that big, but the whole category is going down by 85% because of the Head Start costs, which were one-time costs, and the vehicle purchase program, $45,000 to purchase 2 vehicles, which are being purchased this year, and then these costs are being put on in our projections again in fiscal year 19. There are, again, a lot of assumptions related to the legislations, which are being included in the alternative scenario, but not added to our projections. This slide illustrates financial projections by revenue and expenditure category. And I just want to point one thing, and this is in your packet. We actually have three versions, and I brought another version with technology costs today, so I'll be happy to distribute that version as well. But I just want to highlight the percentage increase line for revenues. Because of the CPI, our overall revenues are increasing about 1%. We do have 1 year in which we have 4%, and it's because of the TIF. But this is why we have structural deficit. And unfortunately, with the low CPI factors, it's just going to continue. On the bottom, you can see the percentage increase for the expenditure line. It's much larger, and it's just so hard to tackle that problem in the current economy. This is another bar chart illustrating expenditures and revenues, and even though the spaces between the red expenditures and the blue bars are small, on the side you can see the size of the deficits, operating deficits. This is without the state legislation, and you can see how dramatically they grow from fiscal year 17, next year, from manageable 500,000 to 11 million. And even in fiscal year 18, there's this cliff of almost 5.5 million, and it's very real. These amounts are, because we know how much we're gonna get in our revenues and in property taxes. In this slide, I put together all the financial threats that we could be facing, we may be facing. There's a pension cost shift starting with 0.5% next year for the total of 2%, increasing 0.5%, and it's 0.5% of our certified staff salaries. Then you have the ISB proposal, about 457,000. You have the Senate Bill 1, approximately 6.7 million. The reason why the amounts start off slow is because of the hold harmless provision. It's a phase-in. It's a phase-in of the deduction. They're not going to hit us with the 6.7. It's going to be phased in over 4 years, but if it's passed, that's what we will experience. And then, of course, the property tax freeze for the levy year 18 and 19, which will hit us in fiscal year 20 and 21. And you can see that the amounts are very large. I mean, the fiscal year 21, it's 12 million, and that's even the 2 million. That's not something that our budget can absorb.
That would be that would be on top of, potentially, on top of the 11 million.
Yes, and there's a
deficits.
version in the projections
Page 45.
that also has that incorporated into projections.
Thank you for putting that in there, Kathy.
This slide, again, this is expenditures and revenues with those financial threats.
This is what you're saying.
So this is what are you talking about, Candace? Deficits beginning with basically 3 million next year, all the way to 23 million in fiscal year 21, if all of that happens. This is a slide that illustrates our fund balance, and I mean, you can see from this slide, and this slide does not have all the state legislation, that even now, our fund balance is very slow. 2 years ago, very low, very low. 2 years ago, we district adopted a minimum fund balance policy at 25%, and we've been working very hard to get there. But unfortunately, you can see that even last year, that's the year with the surplus, and the current year, again, a balanced budget, we are below that blue line, which illustrates that fund balance of the 25% of our expenditures.
If I recall, I think the way we framed the policy was It was a target that
Yes,
we'd
and
be
that's-
trying to build toward over time.
And that's what's recommended by the bond
Right.
agencies, by our financial advisors. They want to see a fund balance at least between, actually, they like to see a range between 25 and 40%, because if it's below, it's going to hurt our rating. And actually, that's why we got downgraded a year ago, because our fund balance dropped.
And when our rating is hurt, it costs more for us to borrow money. And so there's an increased cost.
So this is, again, just a summary of all uncertainties out there. Not only our revenues are at risk, but we also don't know what our salaries and benefits going to cost next year, how we're going to fund our building projects and technology. Thank you.
And you said you created one
Yes.
that has the technology
Yeah,
cost.
could you-
So I want to pass a version with technology expenditures included. And that's line 26 on the chart.
Then if taking this, essentially we're adding, if you go to the farthest year out projected, that deficit becomes 25 million.
Correct.
Yes.
If every condition of the state came to play.
Right, the worst case
Worst case
scenario,
scenario.
thank you.
Right.
But yeah, just looking at that
But-
line,
Play out, if I may, the other piece, which is, as we were talking about the technology challenges of purchasing technology on our debt service, if we actually transfer the purchase of our technology to our operating budget, then, as you can see, as Kathy's prepared, it's about $1.8 million in addition to everything else that we have in the operating budget.
and all the interest savings.
Correct.
Yes. We don't have to borrow to get it.
But unfortunately, that does not affect that side of the budget.
I get it. I totally understand.
Right.
So, again, the risk of repeating a bit, we see financial concerns approaching. And we also see the fund balance chart is actually a really important one, because that is our reserve to help out on a rainy day. And as we're not at the level that we should be, we'll run the risk of having bond ratings that are not where they should be. And then again, in some of the mechanics of running the overall budget, to shift the technology expenditures from debt, from the credit card, as you had mentioned at one of our meetings, but from our debt service into our operating actually has a lot of costs. We don't think, from what I can tell from reports from our state legislators, the state threats, as Kathy presents them, are probably not going to happen. From right now, we don't think they're going to happen in the next fiscal year. The special education shift, we do not believe is going to happen. We don't believe that the equalization will occur, but we don't know. There's a committee that legislative leadership has now appointed starting tomorrow to look at the equalization across the state of Illinois, so they'll be deliberating. I've contacted all three of our elected officials down in Springfield, Daniel Biss and Laura Fine and Robin Gable, and they are nothing but responsive and will tell us what will happen over time. So we're monitoring that. So the state threats are, something will happen with the state when the governor and legislative leadership create a bargain that they'll have to create at some point. And while that's happening, there'll be a continued conversation about the equalization of resources from high wealth districts to low wealth districts. And although we serve a wide variety of children and families, in this particular scenario, we're considered a high wealth district.
Thank you. So, thank you for the presentation. It's sobering, once again, and continues to get more dire every time we discuss it. And the unfortunate thing is we don't have any more information. You think of more time means more information on what might befall us, but we have no additional information, no more information really accept some other options on how we might, other monies might be taken from us, information on when and what might happen beyond what we know. So I'd like to open it up to questions on this, and then we can see if there are other questions on the information presented around the referenda as well. Tracy?
Small question, and forgive me if I missed this in the presentation, but with the expiration of the Child and Parent Center, the I3 funding, what does that practically mean for us? What will we be losing?
Well, the grant is officially expiring next year. It's
December 31st.
of 2016. So what we have in projections, we have full expenditures, and we don't know what's going to happen. I mean, we have expenditures for the grant, but we only have partial revenues. We have about 175,000, and this number will be revised because we have expenditures happening, daily. So again, I know District 65 is in talks with the grantor, and we don't know if the funding will be extended. And depending on this decision, other decisions will be made, whether to continue with the program or if we need to get other funding.
I think the question is, what goes away, though?
That's
What goes
if we
away?
lose it, what do we lose?
Well, we have
Personnel.
Personnel,
And other-
variety of personnel being funded, coaches, teacher assistants. So this personnel will not be funded.
And these are the balancing act of having a fantastic program that's on what we would call soft funding, so that by December 31, that funding will not be available. And given the circumstances that we're facing, we'd have to really prioritize this particular program over many other programs to be able to support it going forward.
Does that mean the study that was conducted based on this is complete? I remember when it was several years ago when the professor from Minnesota came to the board and presented as both a win-win. He was going to conduct a study and offer these services.
He's actually visiting this week, so I'll know a little bit more on Wednesday or Thursday, and so I'll have time with him. From the formal support and the grant will end, and so my operating assumption is that the data are gathered and he'll continue on finishing up those data analyses, and yet that's the fine line of providing the services that come with the project. Those services would probably have to end as of January 1.
We would be getting a final, I assume, report of the efficacy of, in line with this research, what the efficacy of those, applying those resources would, so we could use that as learnings for ourselves.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So then if it ends mid-year, would potentially the services stop mid-year?
Yes, I mean, potentially, and I think that's the difficulty in working towards, and frankly, that would be one of the strategies to reach the balancing of the $508,000 that are in the hole projected for next year.
Will we have the final results on the program, the analysis before it ends, like before we would have to make that?
I really don't know. I mean, I would doubt it because they're still in process. So I don't know, but I don't know the answer on that. I'll know by the end of the week.
I feel like we all need to do some jumping jacks here. Calisthenics.
I have
Yes, no, please, ask questions, so.
on your financial projections slide for employee benefits, is ERO something that we're obligated to offer?
We are
By law.
obligated, we are obligated to offer it in our current collective bargaining agreement, which is expiring this year.
This year. So we are not obligated to offer that .8 million next year?
It would have to be negotiated.
It would have to be negotiated.
And that's if it's offered. If the state offers it, we would have to negotiate it.
And we
Get
will
money
have,
for it from the state?
No. This is a cost to the district. Right now, it's part of our collective bargaining agreement.
Okay.
Which is ending this year. So that whole agreement and everything in it needs to be negotiated. ERO may sunset June 30th of 2016. The state has not, the legislature has not yet decided if they will extend ERO. So if ERO is offered by the state, we would then negotiate that with our staff.
And we were estimating that there would be 15 people taking advantage of this .8 million, is that?
No, there are 5 people taking advantage of it who would be retiring this June. 5.
There's 15 people
15
retired, total
15.
retired, 5 of them would be ERO candidates or.
Those 5 would get .8 million?
No. The cost for the 5 people to retire under age 60 and with less than 35 years of teaching experience would be a cost to the district. That's what we're paying. We're paying a cost to the state because people who are retiring at that younger of an age would be receiving pensions for a longer period of time than if they retired at age 60. So that cost differential, which is computed based on a whole actuarial chart of age and such, determines the cost that employers pay. And right now it is part of our bargaining agreement, and so that's why we're paying that cost.
Okay, but it is, so it may or may not be something that we would pay going forward.
It may or may not be something we negotiate going forward, and it may or may not be something the state offers going forward.
But we are held to the 2016-17 amount because those are 2016.
We're held to
The retirements are
This
occurring
next
this
year.
June. And so our current collective bargaining agreement covers the 5 retirees going this June, and that cost will be paid next year because we will get that bill sometime in August or September.
So this next
Yeah,
fiscal
I
year.
get all that. I'm just trying to figure out why it's .8 million.
Because that's the cost of the particular employees who are choosing to take advantage of it. That is the cost. It's based on age and service, and there's a formula for computing those costs.
Okay, so we take that formula and we do this actuarial accounting going forward of how long they're going to be alive.
The state does that.
The state, okay, well, anyway, we take that number and we put it back in our budget?
No, we estimate, the state has a formula for how they determine what that cost will be.
Okay,
There
but-
are percentages already in place. We know what the employer percentage is, we know what the employee
Okay,
cost
just tell me
is.
what line it's in then in,
It's in the benefit line, it's in the benefit line. Object 200.
So historically, it's been estimated at 500,000, and we've come in at 500,000.
And
There's an increase likely this year because it is sunsetting, so maybe
That's
more
correct.
people are taking advantage of
That's
it
correct.
because they believe it may sunset,
That's
right? So
correct.
that's why it's increased, and it's maxed in our bargaining unit agreement to 800,000.
Yes, correct.
So that's the
yeah, I
highest.
guess what was confusing me is it sounds like from what you're saying, though I think it's actually not what you're saying, but it sounds like you're saying that we take projected future expenses and put them all in one lump sum in one budget year.
No, we have, we've paid close to 500,000 for this cost in prior years.
Okay.
This year is a higher amount because we have more retirees choosing to go under the ERO. So we have an $800,000 figure where in prior years it was closer to 500,000. So we're explaining the higher number is because we have more people taking advantage of that retirement option this year, which might be the last year the state offers that option. Future years, what we're projecting for future years is back to the $500,000 range, assuming this benefit is extended by the state and assuming we negotiate some parameters with our staff.
I'm still not clear, but I don't want to take up any more time for you trying to explain it to me because it's not quite.
We could talk
complete.
maybe separate.
Yeah.
That would be.
Happy to do that.
Other questions on the projections? No? Okay. Okay. So along with the projections or previous to that in the packet, there was also some information around potential referendum. So you can review that. We can talk about questions there today. I wanted to just share with folks, I think given the kind of dire nature of these impending projections, I believe we need to begin exploring all of the options, including the possibility of future referenda for capital or operating support, along with the other options we're already talking about, which in tandem, what types of budget reduction efforts we could possibly, analysis and efforts we would undertake. So just as a precursor to folks asking questions, I had asked our former board member, Katie Bailey, who had been through a previous referenda process, if she might meet with Tracy and myself just to begin exploring the conversation about, given this expertise that she's had in the past, going through the process of what the referenda process could look like, and just start some explorative conversations. Again, this would be done in tandem with our ongoing internal analysis of budget reduction options and alternatives, not to say that both or either, wouldn't have to happen, but just starting that conversation. So wanted to share that with folks. And then, were there questions about the referenda information that was included in the packet? A lot of it's a repeat of similar things we've seen with new dates. And then there is an attachment that looks at the impact of referenda across a number of tranches. Richard?
Just timing. I don't know what you or others may be thinking in terms of timing.
I don't know. I think that, as was provided in the packet, there's kind of two opportunities that are forthcoming. I think that's something that we could discuss, and that's one of the questions I think, maybe asking of Katie. I have personal opinions on timing, but I don't have anything that remotely resembles a recommendation at this time. We are going forward with our discussions internally, and then later with budget task force around budget reduction options. We're entering into, some of these unknowns, one of which is negotiation process. We're entering into that. The soonest we could possibly do something would be for a November referendum, and then the next option would be April of 2017.
If I may, I'm going to evoke an earlier conversation where, and without getting into the details of having one person at the registration desk that then would have to go into privacy and then have to come back. And part of the reason there's one person at the registration desk is that we've made internal reductions over the last several years at many staff levels in the central office, in our custodial services, et cetera. We have to continue to do that. So part of our job is to be at the edge of the utmost of efficiency as we run the system that we have. And so that becomes part of the conversation about referendum as well. And so it's a combination of budget reductions which have been done prior to my arrival here as well. And so the administration before, and as I've landed here, have been doing what we can to reduce where reductions are available. And I think when you look at these resources, we have to continue to do that to the best of our ability and to consider all the other options.
I think when you look at the magnitude of the deficits that we're looking at, wherever it comes in reality, the reality is there's probably going to need to be significant, there's probably going to need to be a combination of levers. I don't think one lever, whether that's internal reductions potentially or referenda, is going to solve this problem. That's just what I see on the face of it. And that's why we need to be exploring multiple paths at the same time.
And I think as I look at page 22 in the packet, which has the dates on it, knowing that we want whatever levers we end up needing to pull, if one of them is a referendum, we'll want to engage the community. And just looking at the board approval for a November referendum would be mid-August. That just feels not doable. And so I would expect that we probably would be looking, if we look too far out, then we're not going to really be able to manage our budget appropriately. So it seems like that next date of April 4th might be one that I could see us looking to target. April 4th, 2017. just to be clear.
From where I sit, I think we want to consider both dates and the other levers, and then also just stare at the bottom line of the projections as we look at them. And then, because timing, the timing for all of this, both, I mean, as you put it, the levers, all of the levers will have an impact on next budget year and the following budget years.
And then we have to weigh it against what happens in Springfield and how
Correct.
concrete all that is.
Correct.
We want as
Much information as we can,
Yeah.
I
Right.
think, and that's what we've been operating under to this time. It's just there's only so far you can go without information until you have to take some
Yet
action.
attachment A in the package is not counting on any changes at Springfield. And if we add 1.8 million in the out years in attachment A for technology, you can see where those numbers in red get larger and larger.
Suni?
I can't speak to, what the process is like as a board member, but I can speak to it as a citizen from the last referendum. And to Richard's point about community engagement, once, we would have to approve, for example, mid-August for a November referendum, at which point the board is going to be relying on a community group to be advocating in favor of this referendum. So that has to be all incorporated into the timeline of figuring out who that community group is. So, mid-August would be incredibly aggressive to figure all that out, when we don't, at this point, really have a plan or a vision going forward. We can, yes, there are a lot of uncertainties, but at some point, we just have to say, this is what we value and what we want to do, and from both the operating and the capital side, I think they're both, given the conversation that we just had, parsing 15,000 here and 30,000 there on maintenance costs. I think clearly a capital referendum is also something that we need to think very strongly about. So I think at some point we need to stop wondering, okay, we need more information, and just decide, this is the information we have, and we have to work with it, and we have to start crafting our vision from what we know now. And the sooner we can do that, and the sooner we can start engaging community members who are going to be advocating on our behalf, when we no longer can do it. We don't necessarily want to say mid-August is our deadline, because really, it would be before that.
Yep.
The longer we can get that engagement happening,
I think,
the better off.
to Richard's point too, I think that we also have an obligation to fully work through what are the scenarios of the types of reductions that we would make in lieu of, or as in tandem with.
I agree, so we need
And
to
so
start
we need to
doing
have
that.
that piece has
Right.
to be there as well, so.
Right.
And some of that work is being done, thoughts about that are internally, but.
I guess what I'm saying is we need to more concretely start doing that instead of talking about doing that. I think we're now at the point where we need to really start moving forward on what is this going to look like, assuming that we're going to have the question out there and really put it to the community of, how are we going to move forward? But we have to create that vision and that plan first. We can't put an ask out there without a very specific,
Well, in a sense, don't they really go together? Because if we don't get the money that we're asking for, we will have to make the cuts.
Oh, absolutely. I
mean,
think,
that's-
that was, in my opinion, that was one of the
that's
biggest failures of the last referendum, is that we didn't have a sufficient plan B of what would happen if the referendum didn't pass. And then basically it was business as usual when it didn't pass. And so there was never an alternative. We would need to come up with what is the alternative if something doesn't pass. But I think we also want to have a vision of this is what we would like to see happening and why we want it to pass. And we're just not there yet. And we keep talking about getting there, but we're not really moving closer to getting there from what I've seen over our discussions on this.
Well, we also have to potentially have a set of scenarios that says we are going to do A, B, and C irrespective of
Agreed, right.
of a referendum that might get us then C, D, E, D, E, F. I don't think it's purely as simple as, if we don't get this referendum, then we are going to have to make these cuts. I think it may be, we have to make certain reductions, and we might have to go deeper with a referendum. And that comes down to the impact potentially of the ask for the community, if it were to get there, and what we think is plausible and reasonable for us to ask of the community. So, being both a steward of community, of the taxpayers' money, as well as a steward of the schools, we have to weigh those both.
The one thing I want to say, and I don't believe you're saying this, but I'm sort of responding, that we do have a vision. We have a vision that's embedded in the strategic plan. We do have fantastic educators who are working in our classrooms. We've got fantastic leaders. We've got community partners. So there's everything that's exciting about our schools we have, and we can be very articulate, very fast on that. And that's something that we want to, as we look at something that is very sobering, we have to remember everything that is really exciting about District 65, what's going on in classrooms. And even when we have challenges, we make opportunities and we move forward. So there's that moment where, again, working with our colleagues who are teachers and support staff and who are working and cleaning our buildings and working to support our buildings and everything we do, that's the sort of enthusiasm that I'm going to bring to the table as we cope with and move forward on some important decision-making that we have to be very timely on.
Right. So we just need to translate that vision into dollars, though, and what that's going to mean.
Yep.
So, and we need to start, like I said, the sooner that we can really start being more concrete, I think the better off we're going to be.
Okay. Thanks. Any other opinions, observations? Because I think folks want to get to the next item. The poor math update. Okay, all right. So we will move forward with that, with our discussions, our preliminary discussions, exploratory discussions. And I think we just need to
Adjourn this meeting, right? And then,
well, I don't think we have to adjourn. We're just going to switch control, or switch whatever,
All right.
modicum of control.
2-minute break or not? Anyone need it?
I need a 2-minute break.
I can run, yeah.
2-minute break.
We will have the presentation, and then you all are free to ask questions, and then we'll turn over to board discussion.
And just to start this off briefly, what we're doing tonight is starting the conversation on math much earlier than we did last year, and bringing it to the board and community members, and thank you for staying the course tonight with us for comments and deliberation as we move forward. We spent a lot of time engaging around these particular issues, in addition to the broader issues of what we're thinking about in terms of mathematics writ large. And indeed, as we have focused extraordinary amount of attention on this work, we want to spend as much time on other aspects of math and other aspects of STEM. And so that's why we're coming at an earlier stage and with some time for deliberation. Stacy, do you want to go?
Sure. Mitsuo will walk us through this, but I think we also want to frame it within the context of the math work. The math team has spent a lot of time really working on 3 different pieces of work this year. First, they are leading the Everyday Math 4 rollout, and that's involved putting new materials in the hands of basically the second half of the district this year, and really putting together some really intensive professional learning summer throughout the year. And the goal there is to really begin to strengthen the Tier 1, so the general instruction, K-5, and we want to sustain that work. Second, we've been working on a math framework for K-5 and 6-8. And that is also focused on continuing to think about how do we take the strong instruction that's in our classrooms and further strengthen it. And it provides good, solid guidelines on what is expected in our classrooms. K-5 and 6-8, the draft of K-5 is going to be available at the end of this month. 6-8 will be completed by the end of the school year. And we're excited that that's going to be a good support for us as we're bringing new teachers into the district, as well as continuing to think about how to grow the teachers within our district. The third branch of their work has been the compaction acceleration conversation. And this group has picked up on the solid work of the math team from previous years and is really trying to, push the last piece of this forward so that we know that we're providing the best possible opportunities for our students in this particular area. So Matsuo?
So as Stacy stated, you have to speak in a microphone, Matsu.
So as Stacy stated, our focus for this year is to define, deliver, and develop high-quality core mathematical instruction throughout District 65. A couple of things that we've been working on is the everyday mathematics implementation, which really facilitating extensive teacher professional development centered around creating young mathematicians. We're also working on mathematics.
Matsu, I'm sorry to interrupt you. You're really going to have to come speak into this microphone so it could be picked up and we can work the computer. Sorry about that. Excuse me.
Good. And as Stacy stated, we're also working on the mathematics framework. The framework identifies high-quality math instruction, identifies curricular resources that teachers need, and provides exemplar practices. And lastly, the other piece that we're working on is our math compaction policy, so that we create a policy that ensures our students experience a high-quality, coherent mathematical learning progression. Next slide. Right. So this slide speaks to not only the purpose for math acceleration, but our goal for the math experience of all students in District 65. We want to provide access to high-quality, rigorous, and coherent mathematical courses for all of our students. We want to ensure that clear and consistent placement criteria are established and used. We want to provide opportunities for all students to enroll in advanced mathematics courses throughout high school, and also to prepare historically underrepresented students for access to and success in advanced mathematics. Right. I want to provide some background around math acceleration in D65. So right now, math acceleration in District 65 is synonymous with skipping a math course. So in order to accelerate in math, students skip ahead 1 year of mathematics. For example, a rising sixth grader skips Math 6, and instead they take Math 7. There's some concerns when you skip a year of math content. It creates gaps and a lack of coherence in mathematical learning. The Common Core State Standards for Mathematics has published a concern about omitting critical concepts and stresses that the continuity of the mathematics learning progression is not disrupted, and recommends that districts create a well-crafted sequence of compacted courses as opposed to skipping content. So the Common Core State Standard recommendation was taken into consideration last year when the math course sequence transition plan was presented. So this plan was presented last year, and if you notice, the school year 16-17, the plan was to create a Math 6-7 compacted course as well as the creation of a summer pre-algebra course. I want to highlight some of the successes that we should all be very proud of, and it is that we are providing access for all of our students to place into advanced college-level math courses. So our current District 65 math pathways, currently there are 2 established D65 math pathways that support 98% of our students. There's an algebra pathway and there's a geometry pathway. Successfully completing the algebra pathway enables our students to complete 1 AP college-level math course before graduating high school. Successfully completing the geometry pathway enables our students to complete 2 AP college math level courses before high school graduation. And here's a diagram of the math pathways. If you look at the far right is our geometry pathway. There are 2 points of entry into that geometry pathway. One is for 6th graders taking Math 7, and the other entry point is for 7th graders taking Algebra 1. In the center is our algebra pathway, where the rest of our students actually complete algebra by the time they graduate from 8th grade. And this is not typical of other school districts around the area, which we'll see in the next slide. Another thing to note, that no matter which pathway our students are on, it progresses into ETHS, so the 9th, 10th, and 11th and 12th grade level, and that students have access to a college-level math course, regardless of the pathway that they're actually on. If we flip over to the next slide, we can take some look at some other successes. Because of our pathways, a large percentage of our 8th graders graduate having passed algebra. Here's comparable school district data around 8th graders passing algebra. And if you notice, 86% of District 65 students pass algebra. And if you compare it to other school districts like Oak Park, where 46% of their 8th graders pass algebra. It's interesting to note that not all school districts offer algebra to all of their 8th graders, and so that might be an explanation as to why the percentages look the way they do. Not only do our students complete algebra while in 8th grade, they are successfully mastering the content as evident by ETHS's placement. So ETHS looks at our student data, and then they place our students, and currently we see that about 80% of our students are placing into geometry or higher when they go to ETHS. Despite our district's success around math achievement in general, we want to ensure that all of our students experience a high-quality, coherent mathematical learning progression. We want to fill in the learning gaps that our accelerated students are experiencing. And so we recommend that District 65 move forward with the math course sequence plan that was outlined and presented last school year. And one of the points are, we want to create a compacted Math 6-7 course to be taken by 6th graders who have been identified with high achievement and mathematical ability. This course will continue to address the Common Core State Standard math skills gaps that students have and making them better prepared for success at higher levels of mathematics. The other piece is that we also recommend at this time that we do not provide the compacted Math 6-7 course to students in 6th grade at King Arts and Betsy Rhodes. Instead, we maintain course skipping only at King Arts and Betsy Rhodes for 6th graders until we can better design a compaction program. We want to come back and reevaluate this decision during next school year. We also recommend that the placement criteria be simplified. We recommend that the teacher survey portion of the placement process be eliminated, and we'll go into further detail in a little bit. And lastly, we are going to continue acceleration as course skipping for grades K through 5. That'll be done on a case-by-case basis, but using the defined District 65 criteria. This slide shows the placement of the compacted Math 6-7 course and the addition of some summer learning opportunities to support student success in algebra. Notice on the right-hand side, instead of the Math 7, there's a Math 6-7 compacted course. There are still 2 pathways to the geometry, to be able to take geometry. So 6th graders would take a Math 6-7 compacted course, or 7th graders can enter in on the Algebra 1. Some other things to note are our summer learning opportunities for pre-algebra. And really the focus here is to really ensure that our support students to be successful as they enter into algebra. I want to go through some of the impacts of creating a compacted Math 6-7 course, including scheduling, course development, and budget. So in terms of staffing and scheduling, it's difficult to design perfectly because we don't want to limit opportunities for students. But whenever you add a new course of any type, it impacts the overall school schedule and staffing needs. Through multiple acceleration projections, we predict a potential staffing increase of 0.3 FTE math teachers per school. That's a worst case scenario. Some other factors that impact staffing: school enrollment, number of students with individualized education plans, and class sizes. The Math 6-7 course will be rigorous and challenging. And so here, right now, the Math 6 is comprised of 7 units, and Math 7 is comprised of 8 units. So by combining these, there will be a total of 15 units. While every lesson won't be taught, students will have the opportunity to master the primary learning goals and outcomes for each unit. So in order to really continue the course development, we're going to start in the spring, take some time over the summer, and we plan to meet throughout the school year to continuously revise the curriculum. So our projected budget for implementing this in school year 17 is $91,600. Please note that this is the worst case scenario with the highest staffing impact. And so the ongoing cost, depending on with the worst case scenario in terms of staffing, is $75,000 per year. And that's having 0.3 FTE at Chute, Haven, and Nichols. Currently, our placement criteria is composed of 3 parts. There's the math map score, a qualifying exam, and a teacher survey. We recommend that the criteria be updated to eliminate the teacher survey. Can you explain what the teacher survey is? So 5th grade teachers, 6th grade teachers, 7th grade teachers filled out a survey. So it's a questionnaire, about 10 questions on every one of their students, which really measured kind of the math practice standards. So really looking at, does the student have the ability to work hard, pick up new material. We ran some calculations, and we found that 98% of our students were placed, properly placed without the teacher survey. So the teacher survey only impacted approximately 2% of the placements. And so that's kind of the push for removing it. In lieu of the teacher survey, we are recommending that we create a gray area. And so there will be a max score, a min score, and then a gray area where teachers and or parents can make recommendations.
What percentage of children are being pushed ahead?
Let's hold our questions until the end.
Our next slide is our timeline. So some of the important dates that we really want to highlight. Starting in late February, early March, we want to host informational sessions at our various school sites to inform our community. In early to mid-April is the MAP testing, so that's one of the pieces to qualify. The second piece to qualify, which would happen in mid-April, is the MAP qualifying exam testing. In the beginning of May, placement letters will be mailed to parents. And then we are proposing to have one retesting date, which would happen May 21st. And then we want to have a final placement agreement by June 3rd. So by the time we leave here in June, our goal is that all of our students and families know where we are placed, which really helps with scheduling at the school level. And now, questions.
Thank you very much. Okay, now.
So what percentage of the children are being moved ahead?
Should have them sit, if you could sit at the tables here at a microphone?
So the question is, what percent of students are being moved ahead?
Currently?
Well, when we say only 2% of the ones are affected by the teachers, you shouldn't divide the 2 by 100, you divide 2 by how many are getting in. So if only 15% of the kids are getting in, by cutting out the teacher thing, you're eliminating, 15% of the kids that used to get in.
No.
That's the correct advisor.
Good clarification around the gray area band. So for 98% of our placement, it was determined by just the MAP score and the qualifying exam. Those 2 components placed our students into the accelerated class. There was 2% of our students that with the teacher recommendation were moved ahead. And so we believe with the creation of the gray band, teachers will still have the ability to recommend students, which we believe would capture the same students as before.
And we didn't do this last year. Parents would actually have a voice in that gray band as well. So, if you're right below what we would consider the minimum band, and there's a strong belief by parent or a strong belief by teacher that the student can actually do well in the course, we'll take that into consideration.
Good.
Just as a comment, the moving from skipping a grade to having a 6-7 is such a vast improvement. Something that I know many of us that have been part of this Math Matters and talking and with Jennifer for all these years is really something we've been focused on for, well, my son is in 6th grade, and we've been talking about this since he was in kindergarten. So I know it's been a long time. So I'm really excited about that.
Appreciate that.
I'd like to add to that. Our son's in 5th grade. He took the, I forget which
pieces went, because they got a number, and he didn't, so we really didn't have any gray area or any, the teacher survey didn't push that over, so, I mean, I like it because, if someone does a test bowl one day on the iMac, or the Mac or whatever it's called, it's kind of there, but, I think this makes a lot of sense to me, especially since we're, benefiting from it.
One of the things that we have to consider is, we want all kids to be successful, and we want, this print is small, but we want the children to be able to be on the pathway so that when they get to high school, they can have as many options as possible, which include advanced mathematics, also includes the advanced sciences there. That said, we don't want to overplace kids, and we especially don't want to overplace kids who might not have, I say this respectfully, the capacities to be successful in the class. And so that's going to be, and so part of this is setting the bar at a high enough level to be able to make the judgment call professionally that this is where a kid needs to be able to be successful in the class, and to really pay attention to that. And then the other pieces, which are to make sure that the classes are of a manageable size for our educators, so that they're not they're overbooked. And so there's a combination effect there.
I just had as a parent, I just wanted to comment that I think this is a great idea. I have a freshman at the high school who took what I think is called the geometry pathway, and it was wonderful for her. But when she heard me talking about this yesterday, she's like, oh, this is a much better idea. To be able to move through the material more quickly is really appealing for a lot of kids. And so thank you for all the work that has gone into this and the resources that you're talking about committing to it. I think it will be really great for the kids. And as you're looking at the K through 5, I also have it wasn't until 4th and 5th grade that her math needs were really met. And I have a 4th grader who's in a similar predicament. And just say, as you're looking down into that K through 5, any strategies that will help kids maybe move through the material. I don't think course skipping is a great option in the elementary grades either. And so as you all are thinking about that, the more creative ways, and I know that it's hard for the teachers, but this is a great first step for the middle schoolers, and I look forward to hearing what happens for K through 5 students too.
I have a couple of comments. I'll represent the magnets. I've got a daughter at King Arts. You want to come to a mic? We are televised, so.
We're televised, so it's how
Yeah,
they
that's fine. Yeah, it doesn't really matter. I'm pretty loud anyways. So as far as this as an option, this is great, but I noticed the magnets are not included in this new model, and I understand, having been through what I went through with 3 weeks of not having a set math course for my daughter this fall, that the staffing is a challenge, but the teachers there do not support course skipping, and they're pretty adamant about the fact that they don't support course skipping as an option. But yeah, we're leaving this on the table as what's going to be available to our kids there, so I just want to bring that up as something that's a concern to me as a parent. The other thing is, I see that from the scheduling, that the algebra class is going to be starting this summer. Those of you who have kids that go to Camp Echo or anywhere else in Evanston know that you had to make your summer plans already in November, December, and so this has not been announced to parents yet. It's February. So like the options for families to be able to go into a course that's 1 month over the summer, and we're now talking February, it's going to be really hard for people they have financial commitments. So I just want to bring that up as a concern. And that's it.
Paul? So, hi. Again, so I'm going to talk a little bit about some concerns that I know I have. First of all, I do want to point out that, during the technology discussion, there was a lot of praise for the work of the standing committee. And I was reading through the recommendation from the math team, and what I'm not seeing here is the recommendation from our contractual math standing committee. The math team is all based at JH. When this was presented at CAC, I asked if the plan had the support of the teachers, and so I'm not currently sure about that. I read through it. I do have some concerns with scheduling and what scheduling looks like at the middle school. I was a math teacher at Haven, I know what the Algebra 1 and the Algebra 8 classes look like. I know that they are very racially divided in 8th grade, and I can see this then carrying down into 6th grade. That's when we start sorting kids. We're going to start sorting them earlier, so we're going to be having these racially divided classes starting in 6th grade. That's just, I mean, that's just what they're going to look like. I think it's important to understand the current, I didn't see it in the report, what's the racial makeup of students who are currently skipping math from grade 6, because I'm looking long term, and it's talking about possibly doubling that number, and so dividing them up even further.
I don't think it's doubling the overall number.
It's not doubling the number.
There were numbers that were going into 17, wasn't it?
It's just that they were taking in both 6th and 7th grade, and together it made 18%, but this way they would be taking more of them all into the compacted, right?
Correct.
So it's the
Right,
same
but
overall
I
number.
think it showed the projection, like where was it at? It's right.
Right. So if, do you want us to pick up and respond to a couple of those?
Sure.
All right. Starting a little bit from the last, and we'll tag off and back and forth. The projected numbers, if we look at the diagrams for the pathways, for enrollment next year is very consistent with the number of students that have been accelerated right now. And one of the things that we want to do is we will be looking at a new class. We do want to keep that entrance line high to help make sure that we can determine that the kids that are going into that are being served successfully, because it will be a faster paced class. And so we aren't looking to make any downward shift initially on kind of the further access to that course. We want to keep that expectation high and make sure that the students that are going to be impacted by the new course are successful. So there isn't an intention of creating initially much more access to this. We want to make sure that it's successful. We are concerned, and we've spent some time thinking about and talking about the racial segregation aspect of this. We clearly have work to do, as has been highlighted in board conversations, about closing the achievement gap. And the reality is that, the group that's impacted by this is a somewhat racially segregated group. We are, our hope on moving forward on the last step of this plan is to get this pathway and this set of courses put together in a good, strong place so that we can turn our attention into looking at, how to further strengthen the work that's being done in K-5, how to create more opportunities for students of color to eventually to get onto this pathway, and to take a look at Math 6, Math 7 and strengthen that work. Lastly, we see that kids going through compacted Math 6-7 would return to the regular algebra courses. And we continue to take a look at Algebra 8 and Algebra 1 and hope that we can find a way to strengthen those programs where we can actually go to one algebra course. So Math 6-7 maybe in the short term is somewhat, disproportionately, somewhat racially segregated class, but our hope is that we'll be tightening up Algebra 8, Algebra 1, possibly to one algebra course down the road. We want to commit some work to doing that so that we would be returning back to, more representative classrooms in the district and not creating a permanent pathway that feels different.
So what's the point of then having a Math 6-7? Oh, because they would take algebra then when they're in 7th grade.
That's correct.
Okay. The other question I had is about the impact that this has on the schedule of a middle school. I know that the math courses often drive the schedule, and that kids who are in the Algebra 1 math class are also in the Algebra 1 language arts reading class. They're in the Algebra 1 science and social studies class, and they are tracked throughout the day. So what's going to, And that really hasn't even been addressed at 8th grade, so how are you going to address it down at 6th grade?
I know we've looked at different schedules, and we think that, yes, there are going to have to be some decisions made in terms of priorities in your scheduling, but we think that there are opportunities, though, to shuffle the kids so that students aren't necessarily cohorted together throughout the whole entire day.
I mean, as a teacher, I've heard that for years, and it doesn't ever happen. I mean, as long as we have teams, at the middle school, those kids are traveling together all day long, so you're not just creating the math group ends up being the language arts group. Well, you
Yeah.
do the same thing, Claudia.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this will definitely take some work sitting down and working with the schools to look at schedules and try to figure out how can we, possibilities to avoid that.
I guess we're just saying, really, it's going to be hard, and you're going to have to really allow enough time to figure that out, because it's not going to be an easy solution.
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, we're not there yet, but Stacy's point about getting to a point where Algebra 8 and Algebra 1 are one course, we'll address that a wee bit as well.
Will it?
Well, it won't separate it off.
Well, because
Yes, there'll be one course in 8th grade, right?
one course in 8th grade, but the 6th grade, the compacted 6, 7 is, they're going to be, they'll be on their own in 7th grade, and so you're still going to have a cohort
So
there.
then everybody will want to be in
Right.
7th grade.
Yeah. The currently students that skip, so if a student has skipped Math 7, they are in a regular Algebra 1 class. It's not that they're in a separate cohort on their own. They get blended into the existing Math 6, Math 7, Algebra 1 classes. Sorry.
The Algebra 1 class is separate from the Algebra 8.
Currently, yes. Currently, yes.
And they're completely racially divided. the
Right.
Algebra 1 and Algebra 8.
Right. Fine.
And we've been doing work kind of looking at that course, and our hope is that we can.
Because you're starting it earlier.
Finish up, Stacy, what were you
You
saying?
know, our hope, so we've been doing some work looking at both the scope and sequence of those courses and the experience in those courses. And the intention is to continue to take a look at that, provide supports, and see if there's a way that we can, again, move that into one algebra course so that we limit the amount of time that we do spend separate, without limiting the pathways and the preparation that students need. Because I think this compaction proposal is really about a set of students we don't believe we are preparing as well as we can, because we are leaving gaps in their education at this point in time.
Well, I want to be clear, I like the idea of compaction very, very much. But I do share Paul's concern about that we don't somehow end up with such racially divided classes, because that's just.
I think we very much share that concern too. And, we are weighing that, and we're going to work to the best extent possible to limit that impact. But then we also, with that, we have to take a look at the experience up at Algebra 1 and Algebra 8, and we have to continue to look at what we're doing at K-5 about just overall better preparation, because it's not an isolated problem.
Can I just say one more thing, which is, right now, the kids who are 6th graders taking Math 7, right? They are in a mixed class. So now, when you are creating this new compacted class, that they're not going to be in that mixed class anymore. Because currently, those 6th graders are mixed in with 7th graders, just regular 7th graders. So you're going to be creating, right, more racially divided classes with the compacted 6, 7.
Currently, there are mixed Math 7 classes, which have 6th graders and 7th graders.
Right.
At Haven this year, there's one unique Math 7 class with just 6th graders because of the number of students that accelerated. And so this Math 6, 7 class would look kind of like that class. It would be a unique class that wouldn't have a blend of 7th and 6th graders.
I don't think she's saying it's not a good thing. You seem to be saying it's a good thing. It's like a confusion.
No, I'm just agreeing with that. Yeah.
So I'll say, I like well, first of all, I like compacting, and I had a kid, we were in Chicago schools, and she skipped grades, and she actually hates math now because I think she lost some of that foundation, so I think it's the right thing to do. I think when you go to your purpose slide, and I would beat Jess up if he was here, because I think he wrote the line about preparing historically underrepresented students for success in advanced mathematics. And I'm just curious how, and I know you don't have a plan yet, but I think that's going to be the big, you know, as you put this out there, I don't understand how, and I look forward to it, and how you're going to close that gap, or how you're going to prepare these students. And you put that purpose there, and so now it's written, you have to live up to it, so.
No, and that's our goal. Some of the things that...
This doesn't say goal, this says purpose. So I just want to let you know. And the other bullets, I think you've hit them all. It says provide access. I think you're doing that. It says ensure clear and consistent placement. You put that in place. You have a strategy, you have your gap, you have your line, you have all your charts. It says provide opportunities for students to enroll in advanced mathematics. You've done all that. And then it says prepare historically underrepresented students. So you've hit 3 out of the 4. I'm just looking forward to you hitting the 4, and I want to make sure that you know that that's one that you know, that's the one that's missing.
Yeah, we appreciate that, and we hope as we move forward, the pre-algebra course in the summer will be helpful with that. In the short term, that course is more targeted towards students that would be, that are currently in Math 6 that didn't have the benefit of compaction. And then I think as we see the success in this course, we need to figure out what other supports we're putting in place to create access for other students.
I think she made a good point about the summer camps, because we went through lottery too.
Without a doubt.
So,
Yeah, without a doubt.
Summer's locked up already for a lot of families. Another thing I just want to ask about the 0.3 FTE, because that's really your cost. What is it? Is that one person spending time at each of those schools, or one person that will be traveling for 0.3? And is that a new person? Like, what is that?
I think there are multiple ways to do it. It could be one person traveling across all 3 schools, teaching a class, a section at each school. It could be a part-time teacher at each place.
What is your vision? Because you guys wrote it. So when you wrote it, what did you think it was going to be one person traveling all schools? And the only reason why I'm asking, because I think it would be consistency if you can do it. If the same person is, you know.
Well, it couldn't be because teachers have to have travel time, so you couldn't have one person go to 3 schools.
So the reason this FTE is in here is we wanted to make sure that with the addition of this new course, that we weren't having a disproportionate impact on the class sizes of other classes. And so we will know once kids have taken the placement exam and we have the NWA results and we see the number of students that are required in this class. What we didn't want to have happen was that we ended up with 2 very small math compacted 6-7 classes that then might have had a disproportionate impact on a math 6 size or a math 7 size. So that position is in there to make sure that we are able to maintain smaller class sizes in the traditional math classes to meet the needs of those students. And when we get the numbers, we'll understand whether it's going to be required at 1, 2, or 3 of those schools.
What's your plan for the magnet school middle schoolers?
We looked at a couple of different scenarios to see if we could do it this school year. None of those solutions we thought were optimal. Some of the things we considered, students traveling to go to shoot. The bell schedules are so far off that kids at Rhodes and King would lose so much instructional time coming back to their home school, so that wasn't viable. We thought about possibly Rhodes, possibly going to King and taking a class there. And which may be something we consider in the future as a possible solution. Skyping was another one, but then we thought about the collaborative nature that we really want to instill and develop in our students. And so we need to consider this more and look at the impact that it would have on King and Rhodes.
Candance, you're about to ask a question.
I was just going to ask about the purpose and the use of the pre-algebra class in the near term. So you basically asked that question and then point to, as we move forward, that is a place where we should be helping to identify high potential minority students and using that as a gateway to those advanced classes.
And we do understand the time challenges for this summer.
Yeah.
The hope for this summer is that students, if in fact they would have been slated to skip Math 7, that if they are able to access that pre-algebra course, we believe that that'll address some of the gaps and make them more successful in Algebra 1. And then going forward, we'd be looking to kind of identify and create access for this course, provided the success of the course.
Do you have any data on, sorry, the success of students? So I saw this compared to data where 86% of our 8th graders pass algebra. And it's interesting because you know our scores, it's sort of confusing, but I understand what it's saying because it's saying pass the class. It's not saying how they test.
Correct.
And so I almost think we should throw that out, like it does, like, whatever. But my real question is, so how do these kids do once they're placed in geometry? I mean, I'm shocked to see 60% of our kids are going into geometry. How are they doing when they're in geometry? I mean, are you guys working together with 202 to make sure that they're successful, that we're not just putting them in these classes?
We've contracted with Hanover Research to kind of pull that data for us to answer. That's one of the questions we want the research team to figure out for us. How our kids are our kids being successful once they go to ETHS?
But you have been having ongoing conversations with ETHS as part of this process. So we don't have the big picture around the historical success rate.
How does the scores relate to passing the class?
Right.
You know that?
It doesn't make sense against the college and career readiness benchmarks. It makes zero
Right.
sense. That we have so many kids passing, yet we have 47% that are college and career ready at 5th and 8th grade. So I agree with Omar that I think we should look at the benchmarks the board has set as I mean, it's great to know that because then we can judge grade, I hate to say it, but grade inflation and passing kids along that really aren't measurably ready to be passed along. So I find that a big anomaly in the,
But I think
at least
you do-
look at both.
It isn't, I mean, they use it because nationally, and we've been told this as we've been, migrating to try to, nationally, you want to try to get everyone to have algebra by 8th grade, right? That's some magic sauce going on there. I'm not convinced that it is magic sauce,
It's highly
but.
correlated.
but-
There's a lot of research that shows if you don't have algebra by 8th grade and you're not performing at a proficient level, you significantly reduce your ability to achieve certain careers and therefore get jobs later in life. There's a lot of research that shows it, so that's why nationally everybody looks at 8th grade being proficient in algebra.
One of the concerns we have, and this is in the extended memo, many, if not most, teachers have told us that when a kid gets placed when he skips a class, he or she skips a class, and is not doing well, that it's hard to address their needs. And so we're looking at a grade threshold at the end of the first trimester to be able to say if a young person isn't succeeding in the class, that teacher, parent, kid should interact, and that the teacher should have full voice on that in order to be successful, the placement may have to go from the compacted class back to where the kid should be placed. And again, we have that in.
And then what's going to happen there is that will change the kid's whole schedule, not just the math class. They'll have to change science, English, all of it, because
Right.
that's what used to be done, and that's what happened.
Right. But we want to respond to, this is again.
I'm not saying
these are-
that don't do it,
right.
I'm just saying that you have to be very aware of that's the impact of that kind of policy decision, is that you then take a bunch of kids who schedules change, and the teachers have to adapt to those kids who have not been in their classes up to this point, and it's.
One would hope it's not a bunch.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the rationale for starting with, a hard and high line acceptance, because we want this to be successful for students, for teacher, and then we, figure out how to move forward with it.
So I have a question about the Hanover research. You're doing this in conjunction with 202? I imagine you need to use our data sharing agreement and all of that. So they're involved in this analysis? Because
Correct.
that's great. That's something that we've been asking for at the Joint Committee, so I'm excited about that. I also think when you're looking at how we're setting kids up in 9th grade in the high school, you need to distinguish between geometry and geometry honors and these different levels of courses, because I think it sets kids on very different paths, and we should be aware, are we getting kids faster to these courses, or are we getting them to higher levels? And that's an important distinction.
Actually, I have the data for this year's, the preliminary placement, so I could share that.
Yeah, I think by the time we come back, there are a couple of things we probably need to flesh out, and that's one of them. And then I think the summer program, I think we need to have a better sense of the timing and the criteria and how that's going to look. And then I also think you've made I think it's a great thing that you're continuing to look at this 2% or whatever, the small percent K through 5, but what that will look like, what the defined criteria will look like, so everyone, we don't go back to it being a mystery why certain kids are accelerated early on.
And absolutely, semicolon, I think we have to not overpromise that between now and February 24th, we'll have some ideas about what the K through 5 pathway and journey will be. We won't have the solid plan then because we've been spending all the time working on this. So that's part of what we're doing next.
But in terms of simplifying, because I think everything, we're working towards simplification, it could be as much as saying, you know, any kid who tests over the 99th percentile on math, we're going to, you know, evaluate. That would be, I mean, that's as, you know, I don't think you need a complex formula for that.
I would like to point out that, you know, we have, over the last couple of months, been looking at the achievement report and the board meetings that people have come to and spoken to us in depth about the struggles that they've had with getting, why their kids aren't achieving. And we've heard impassioned pleas from, or impassioned statements from board members about how we are committed to addressing the achievement gap. We're about to suggest spending $91,000, potentially $75,000 recurring on creating a tracked course that, in my mind, how does that help the achievement gap? I don't know that it does. It seems to exacerbate it. From what Stacy was saying earlier, we know that it's not going to help it in the near term, for sure. And so I'm wondering why we wouldn't spend this money. Why is it not better spent on, you know, for example, a math specialist in second grade who can help struggling learners? Why isn't it better spent, you know, we talked about the CPC grant expiring, and which is something that is a program that's intended to assist low-income minority families. Why would this money not better be spent on potentially continuing that program? We're talking about a fairly high spend on students who are already succeeding in our system. And it's not even just the spend, it's all the resources that we've spent to get to this place. Our actions don't match our rhetoric and what we're saying that we are committed to. And to me, it seems like we're going, you know, all the educational research doesn't support tracking. And yet that's what we're talking about going back and doing. And so to me, this just doesn't match. I don't understand. To look at this number, I don't know how we can justify spending that money. And what do we say to parents who are coming and saying, my kids aren't succeeding, what are you doing for our kids? I don't know. What are we doing for their kids? Because right now I see what we're doing and how we're spending money for kids who are already doing very well in school. So there's a disconnect for me.
There's one aspect of your report that I liked, and I thought maybe we could capitalize on that in order to reduce the spend, is I do think a higher count, the class size for these compacted courses might in fact help these other courses if we could. I mean, I think 30, 32, maybe if these kids are really, you know, ready for the challenge, maybe we really make these courses bigger, and so we have more resources for the kids that are struggling, and we don't, in fact, add to the, you know, our overall spend nearly as much. So I mean,
But
maybe
it's still
that's
a
way
tracked
balancing.
class, though. The
Those
research
are
says
two
doesn't.
different questions, though.
But-
What I'm talking about is the money right now. Maybe we try to bring down the cost by recognizing that maybe these kids could operate in bigger classes because they don't need as much support, which would allow for more support for some of the kids that aren't.
But what I'm saying is that research doesn't necessarily support that a tracked class, even if it's smaller, is necessarily beneficial. So
But we already, with the acceleration that we're doing, in a sense, we by de facto create a tracked class.
Well, except
And
in
this is just-
theory, at least, it's still a mixed
But it
class that
isn't
they're
in
getting
fact.
You're
into.
talking about optics versus the reality. I mean,
I'm not saying
and
that I
I
support
don't-
the big push that we've been making over the years for acceleration. I haven't been. I think we have focused entirely too much time and energy on trying to create a pathway for students who are already very successful. So like I said, it's just a disconnect for me. We're spending a lot of time and resources and taking away time and resources on our struggling learners, on our struggling math learners. What are we doing for them? What's the spend on, why can't we have math specialists like we have reading specialists who can come in and help struggling math learners?
those are all important needs. I do think we need to put it in context when we think about the benchmarking that we had done some time ago and look at our peer districts, many of whom, like Oak Park, spend considerably more on these types of acceleration programs or whatever you want to call them relative to us. Yes, we can talk about this $90,000, but in the larger scheme of things, our district spends very little money relative to our peers and relative to peers who have. So I just think that's not exactly accurate if you look at those numbers, that the amount of money that we spend, we've always spent on this one class or on this one acceleration program.
So just as, and Suni, we do hear your concern and we feel your concern because we very much want to address those achievement issues. One of the things that I think is critical here is, we picked this work up, we have some clearly identified gaps that are not allowing us to create the preparation that we know we can provide for this group of students and helping to ensure a level of success. This work was kind of was one step away from the finish line. And I think when we really looked at this, we said, we understand what the potential next step is. We see what the opportunity is. Let's put this piece in place, strengthen this pathway for this group of learners, rather than leaving kind of a known challenge in place. And then let's move from this conversation and really begin to focus on the issues that you're talking about. And so I think our challenge was, we're this close to the finish line on something that we know is flawed for a set of learners right now. So can we finish this work, and then can we really turn our attention to the challenges that you're talking about? Because we do feel those, and we really do know that those have to be addressed. And our hope is that we do this, we can turn our attention there, and really begin to make some differences there.
And we look at the math frameworks, we look at how we really define and truly define differentiation in the classroom, where the materials are that would help a teacher with a wide variety of skill levels, and how to focus on the kids with the greatest needs. And that's going to take a lion's share of our friend Matsuo's time, as well as our math team here, as well as other colleagues.
I know some things we're looking at Haven. Haven has a support class for some of their struggling learners, and we're wondering, is that a model that we could replicate and use, particularly to support like sixth graders next year? And so that's something that we want our math team to really start focusing on. How can we have really good instruction for all sixth graders, regardless of if you're going into a compacted 6-7 class or you're in the math 6 class?
But obviously, we need to be, we keep talking about middle school math, but really we need to be talking about first grade math and second
These
grade
kids are
math.
not behind because they didn't fall behind in sixth grade. Or
Correct.
seventh
Correct.
grade, or eighth grade.
We have to figure out how to trickle it down.
As a parent, I know we've not met, and so I'm sorry that I don't know you well, but I spend a lot of hours in our schools working with our struggling learners, and I'm sorry my daughter's not here, but she did not feel successful. Even though she was a white girl who was doing well in math, she was really unhappy and frustrated, and she didn't understand why she couldn't be challenged. And in addition to our commitment to our achievement gap, which I completely understand, I have to speak up for my daughter, because we also say on all of our t-shirts, on all of our letterheads, every child, every day, whatever it takes. And I hear what you're saying about the money and the gap, but do we really mean every child, or do we mean unless you're a smart white kid, then you're just gonna do fine and we're not going to give you anything. And that's a hard, so I understand, but there has to be a balance. I'm just saying, like, I hear what you're saying, but she didn't feel successful, and in math. And I know we're talking about in the global picture, oh my gosh, yes, as adults, we can have that conversation, and I understand it, for many reasons. But it's not a huge sum of money in the scope of what our budget is to support a group of kids who are just trying to be challenged in math. And the kids who maybe aren't in those classes in middle school aren't not in them because of 6th and 7th and 8th grade. I see what goes on in the elementary schools, in the early grades. And I saw the kids who were in my daughter's math group all the way through elementary school. And I don't know why they weren't. They tested fine. I don't know what happened after 5th grade. But it's just not that simple for those kids who really struggle to find the challenge in school. And I understand that it's not a struggle in the big scheme of life, but it is, they also want to be challenged in their education. And I don't think that that's too much to ask of our district. Sorry,
No, and you know, I appreciate your comments, and obviously I appreciate your advocacy on behalf of your daughter. I mean, as parents, that's what our job is.
I try to advocate for every child. I really do try to advocate for all the kids in the district, and I spend most of my time working on that. But it has been a big part of our District 65 experience and an unsatisfying part of it. And I have to speak up for my kids because they've been very unhappy. And something that gives them a chance to succeed in an area that they enjoy. I mean, she was 10 and loves math. It's important to talk about our racial achievement gap, but how many girls are we putting in these advanced math classes, and how are they doing? I think that's also worth mentioning. So, sorry.
Can I just jump in too, because I haven't had a chance. You guys see me a lot, and I'll make it quick. But I would like to jump on that, and some of you know I worked at the College Board for many years. We would call a class like this and an opportunity like this access to opportunity. We would never use the word tracking. And what we would say is, why can't every kid be at that level? I know they're not now, but why can't every kid? So I kind of get offended by hearing about tracked and by hearing about shutting off opportunities that just want to get ahead. And I almost did ask the question of the two young engineers that were sitting there, what class were you taking in 8th grade? What level math were you taking? And I don't think the answer would have been that they weren't on some accelerated math path. They wouldn't be industrial engineers at Northwestern if they were just taking before algebra, or not ready in 8th grade with geometry or something more advanced. So I think we really have to think about that. I applaud the work of the team. I think it's fantastic. I think something that wasn't pointed out was how the test changed, where it's more a test on opportunity, not on what you know. I think that opens it up to a lot of other kids who might have potential but not actually have mastered the facts. So I think we have to jump on that as a huge positive of what the team has done. I will say, what I was going to say was, please, you guys, when you go forward, I was going to make my K-3 pitch, that we really have to pay attention to K-3. I would like more minutes, I would like more fluency tutors, and I would like more of the use of technology to assist our teachers in differentiation. So that would be the next focus, and I think it's time, and let's all move on and get to those really urgent matters. That's all I had to add.
Anyone else? Okay. I think, Paula? Okay, I think it's probably late enough. We've all been here a long time, so unless there's something urgent. I think we are at the end of our agenda, so unless there's any more news or business before the board, this meeting is adjourned. That was a mouthful.